Chapter 49. All Might. Izuku says cautiously as he waits for his tea to cool down. It's Saturday and the common room is empty, with most of his classmates visiting family or hanging out away from the dorms. Usually he would be out as well, but after yesterday's discussion, he finds himself craving his mentor's presence just a little more than usual. At the moment it's just him and All Might sitting at the table by the dorm kitchen. Can I ask, how does Night Eye's quirk work, exactly? I mean, I know he keeps it under wraps, but he knows about One for All, right? So you know about his quirk, too? All Might hums thoughtfully over his food. Without his stomach, he has to eat small portions frequently. The way he always described it was like looking at frames on a film reel. When he touches a living person, he can see the course of their life, second by second. There are limits, of course. He can only activate it once per day, and he has access to it only for an hour. So it's purely visual. No sound. And how much of it can he see? My boy, why do you want to know? Izuku shrugs. I just want to know what kind of future he saw and how he saw it, he says. If there was any chance that maybe he just misinterpreted it. But I guess if it's like a film reel. Then he saw it run out, All Might finishes. How much does the frame show? Izuku asks. Does it show him things through their eyes, or? No. He said it was more of a limited third-person sort of view. But it's narrow, mostly he just sees the person and their immediate surroundings. Izuku nods as he files away the information. Is there any particular reason you want to know? All Might asks. I was thinking. Izuku finishes drinking and pushes his cup further in. We've been hearing a lot about internships lately, and All Might makes a quiet, vaguely disapproving noise. What? To be honest, I was against the decision to move forward with internships, at least for first-year students, All Might admits. The school took a strong stance in holding both the sports festival and the summer camp in spite of serious threats, and I'm not sure it's a good idea to continue with that particular tactic, especially since it didn't stop you and Yonbakudo from being abducted. Izuku winces. If anything, what happened in Kamino just makes the internships even more important, he points out. We meet heroes more than ever now, don't we? You may be right about that, All Might concedes. But I'm not sure if the correct response is to send heroes out even yonder. They wouldn't be, though, Izuku says. It'd just be carrying on as normal. I'm uncomfortable with it, All Might tells him. Especially given everything you've been through. And despite Totahimika's appearance at the exams, we don't know where the lead is or what they are planning. Izuku chews this over carefully before answering. I want to learn all I can. Aizawa-sensei said we should use the connections we made from the sports festival nominations if we decide to do internships, but I know Gran Torino's not very active and, honestly, with everything we've talked about, he braces himself. Do you think you could introduce me to Sir Night Eye? All Might almost chokes on his food. I beg your pardon. You said he's been in contact with you recently, Izuku says hesitantly. So it wouldn't be out of the blue. And he knows about One for All like Gran Torino did, so it'd make sense, wouldn't it? And besides that, well, never mind besides that. Could you? He has been in contact. All Might stops eating and lays down his chopsticks. We've spoken, technically, but not pleasantly. I don't have his ear as I once did. It's just not. Izuku searches his face, then looks to Nana. He can tell that All Might is trying to hide things, but he's not good at it, and Nana is even worse. Izuku has seen enough ghosts to recognize old regret when he sees it, and the way Nana is looking at him only confirms it. Were you and Night Eye close? He asks cautiously. You said you worked well together, but you were friends too, weren't you? You had to have been if he told him about One for All. You wouldn't have needed to if you were only co-workers. All Might's mouth twitches like it's trying to smile, but it can't quite manage it. We shouldn't have been, he says. We had practically nothing in common from the start. He had all the sense and cleverness, and that formed the basis of our partnership. I trusted him to know the best course of action, and he trusted me to heed him. When I rejected his advice outright, it was a betrayal of that trust. I did it a second time when he pointed me to a promising successor, and I chose you instead. While I can't regret either of those decisions, I also can't ask anything of him. Not now. Izuku nods, pursing his lips to keep from frowning. I'll think of something else, then. By that I don't believe I can be the one to introduce you, All Might says. But I do know someone who can and would probably be willing. We can talk more about this on Monday if you're sure. I'm sure, Izuku says firmly, and the discussion ends there. All Might seems to hesitate for a little while, then coughs a bit to clear his throat. I actually had a question for you as well. Sure. Well, at that moment, the elevator door opens and Ida, Todoroki, and Uraraka emerge with Tensei wandering after them. Uraraka looks a bit run down and Ida has a book tucked under his arm. They wave as they pass the kitchen and settle on one of the couches, well within hearing range. It can wait, I suppose. They are just taking a break from studying, Tensei explains. Don't mind them. Izuku nods to him, then turns back to All Might. Were you about to ask something about the ghosts? On the couch, his three friends go quiet and look up, startled. All Might blinks, equally surprised, and switches between looking at them and looking at Izuku. Everybody here knows, Izuku says. About the ghosts. So if you're going to ask about them, then it's all right. Oh, All Might says faintly. I see. So we can talk about it around All Might. Uraraka asks cautiously. Is anyone else safe? Todoroki adds. My mom. Bakudo, technically. Izuku looks up at All Might again. So what did you want to ask? His mentor blinks a few times, recovering from his shock. Well, actually, I spoke to your mother recently about your quirk, he says. And I'd like to know more if you're willing to talk about it. He hesitates. She suggested that I start by asking about Rei. Izuku looks up, surprised, then glances around sheepishly. Rei isn't with him at the moment. Recently she's taken to following Kaminari and Ashido around just to spook them whenever possible. She isn't hurting them and she's having fun, so Izuku can't begrudge her that. I'd introduce you, but she's not here right now. Does she follow you often? All Might asks. Most of the time, Izuku says. Right now she's off bothering Kaminari and Ashido. She says they are fun to tease. Is it all right to let her do things like that? Ida pipes up. That seems. Izuku shrugs. She's 9, I'm not gonna tell her not to have fun whenever she can. He looks up to find Ida and All Might both staring at him in shock and mingled horror, and realizes belatedly that dead 9-year-old girls aren't the most comfortable of conversation topics. Todoroki and Uraraka have already seen Rei, so at least they aren't surprised, but... Do you want to know more about my quirk? Izuku asks. He isn't sure if he's asking All Might or his friends. I mean, all of it. Not just Rei. I'd like to, All Might says softly. If you're comfortable with it. Izuku looks over to his three friends. Todoroki is sitting up straighter while Uraraka watches him intently. Ida clears his throat. Whatever you're all right with telling us, Midoriya. Izuku mentally runs through the people he knows are in the dorms. Jiru, Hagakure, and Shuji are not among them. Almost everyone is either out for the day or spending time at other parts of the campus. In fact, he's pretty sure the only other person here is Sira, who was complaining early about wanting to sleep all day. He gets up from the table. Wait here, I'll be right back. It's a quick run up to the second floor, into his bedroom. He throws himself flat, reaches under his bed with groping fingers, and finds the box. It's only a plain old jewelry box that his mother gave him when he was small, held shut with a tiny lock that he quickly removes. Tucking the box under his arm, he hurries back downstairs. All Might rises from the table as he passes and follows him to the sofa where his friends are waiting. Izuku sits down among them, places the box on the table in front of him, and opens it. It's full and cluttered, items placed in with little rhyme or reason. There's no organization to it all, but Izuku knows what each one means. Photographs. Slips of paper. An old coin. A ring. A metal tag from a pet's collar. Todoroki picks that out of the box, turning it over in his fingers. Mika, he reads. This was your cat's. Izuku takes a deep breath. I met her old owner at the park, he says. There was a villain attack in that area 3 days before, and she died in it. She took me to her apartment, and when I got in, there was Mika. She'd been alone for 3 days, and Ms. Yamamoto didn't move on until I promised I'd make sure her cat was okay. He swallows the growing lump in his throat. I took her to a shelter first. And when no one adopted her, I went back and got her myself. He takes the tag from Todoroki and puts it back in the box, then takes out the ring and puts it on the table. I found this on a beach I went to a lot when I was training to get into UA. Out of the corner of his eye, he sees All Might stiffen. I called it the Screaming Beach because the place was a dump and there was a ghost stuck in an old trashed car in the middle of it all, and all day. She'd just cry. All the time, until I finally found her. She lost her engagement ring on that beach, and her fiancé thought she threw it away on purpose, so he cut the brakes on her car so she wouldn't leave him. It took a while, but I found her ring the night I got my acceptance letter from UA. His voice cracks. She said her name was Sacha. He goes through a few more things. A ribbon from a child's well-loved stuffed animal. A coin from a collection that was worth enough to save a widow from losing her house. A necklace in the shape of half a heart with the word best engraved into it. So you keep something from every ghost you meet. Todoroki turns the necklace over between his fingers before putting it back. If I can, Izuku says. There isn't always something to keep. I just don't want to forget them. And the people that they leave behind. Ida says. Do you ever tell them? Izuku shrugs. I could never be sure they'd believe me, and I was always afraid I'd just hurt them if I told them that someone they missed stayed for a little while, but they couldn't have seen them or touched them anyway. I thought it'd just be better to let them live their lives and move on. And half the time, there's no one to tell anyway. He reaches into the box again, sifting through the items until he pulls out the photograph and puts it on the table. Morigawa Hitomi's unsmiling face peers through her hair, frozen in time. Todoroki sits forward, and Uraraka gasps softly. That's her, isn't it? She says in a hushed voice. Who? All Might asks. Izuku swallows the lump in his throat. I met her when I was 5 or 6, he says. Back when they still scared me. She was smaller than them, even though she was older than me back then. I think she was the first real friend I ever made. He looks around, just to make sure Ray isn't coming back. We were both lonely. The other ghosts get scared of her. She didn't talk, and she didn't remember anything about who she was. So I just called her Ray. He sees Todoroki's mouth twitch at that, but no one interrupts. She's been with me ever since. No other ghost has ever stayed as long as she has. She's like my sister. My big, little sister. He plays with the photograph, trying not to let his hands tremble. I found this in the Camino warehouse. A hand closes on his shoulder, gripping lightly All Might's. I didn't know how she died, Izuku goes on. I found their file on her, and I read about what they did to her before they killed her. They were trying things, they were trying to figure out how to make Numa, and they took her because she didn't have anyone and no one would come looking for her, and his voice shakes. She was 9 when it happened. She was a little girl. They did that to a little girl. It's then that he realizes he's probably said too much. They were horrified just learning her age, and Izuku isn't sure he can bring himself to look up and see their faces now. What must they think, knowing he can eat and sleep and live like everything is normal when he has that in his head? Are they all like that? The quiet question comes from Todoroki, sitting close enough to press up against him. From the guilty look on his face, he's asking it against his own better judgment. Izuku purses his lips, wondering how to answer. Not all of them, he says at last. But enough. Most people don't leave behind ghosts if they die of natural causes. They are usually unhappy. Or there's something they want to do. Or someone they want to see. Sometimes they stick to one place, sometimes they wander, sometimes they follow people. For better or worse. Like Uraraka's no fails her the moment the first word is out. Her eyes are on Ida. Like my brother, he finishes. Izuku nods. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes they stay because there's someone they love. Or someone they want to thank. But sometimes it's because they want payback. I mean, villains, almost every villain I've ever seen has had ghosts with them. Just following. Waiting. Kamino. All Might asks. Izuku's breath shudders in and out. There were so many I couldn't breathe sometimes. He shakes himself. But that was a good thing. I had help. I had so much help. I don't think I'd be here right now if they hadn't helped. And he swallow, trying to fix his dry throat. All for one's as good as dead. So they've probably, because of me, he doesn't say. He remembers his escape, remembers Ghost reaching for him, and in reaching back, recognizes now the sensation of offering them one for all, giving them the strength and solidity they need to turn and fall upon their killer and Dr. Tsubasa. He's not sorry. He'll never be sorry. They could have lived if they just hadn't killed so many people, if they hadn't given him so many angry, vengeful ghosts. They could have lived if they'd left Izuku alone, if they'd left Bakugo alone, if they'd left Morigawa Hitomi alone, but they didn't. They made their choices, and Izuku will never be sorry that their crimes caught up with them in the most direct and literal way possible. But he won't forget it, either. He's not like them. He'll remember the people he's killed. There are arms around him, Urarakas, then Todorokis, then Idas, and finally All Mights. He's surrounded by warmth and beating hearts now, driving back the memories of cold hands and misty figures. Izuku lets his eyes slide shut, lets them pull him back into the world of the living. It feels better, talking about this. They don't understand, can't possibly understand, and they can't help. But at least he can talk about it now, with someone living who isn't just his mom. Just because no one understands what it's like to know the things he knows, doesn't mean he's alone. And who knows? Maybe he'll find someone who does. As promised, All Might calls him to the faculty office on Monday, and Izuku barely waits for a nod from Aizawa before running to the locker room to change back into his regular uniform. A few of his classmates give him curious looks, but Izuku puts that aside for now. He can explain things once he gets a solid answer one way or the other. He leaves his uniform jacket and sets off for the main school building at a run, Ray darting along with him. In his eagerness, he takes a few most likely unsanctioned shortcuts, jumps a few fences, and dodges at least one surveillance droid to shave off a few seconds. The top of the building is creeping into view over the surrounding roofs when Ray calls out a warning a moment too late. Izuku turns a corner as she shrieks and nearly collides with someone. Sorry. He yelps, and a firm hand on his shoulder steadies him. Not a problem. A familiar cheery voice replies. You seem to be in an awful hurry. Izuku blinks, and Tagada-senpai's smiling face shocks a smile out of him as well. Oh, hi, senpai. Sorry for running into you, I just got called in from the athletic field. I'm sure whoever called you in will understand if it takes you an extra minute or two, Tagada assures him. Ray prances around him unseen, looking eager. Are you heading to the faculty office, by chance? That's where I'm going myself. Ah, yeah. Izuku slows up to walk with him, trying not to smile at Ray's excitement. He's never seen her take to someone as quickly as she has to Tagada. I was discussing some stuff with All Might, and he said he'd have an answer for me today, sir. Tagada pauses mid-step for a moment before continuing. All Might was the one who called you in. Yeah, why? It's the oddest thing, then, Tagada muses. He's the one who called me in, too. Izuku blinks and feels the gears turn in his own head as he adds 2 to 2 and makes 4. Senpai, you wouldn't happen to know a hero named Night Eye, would you? Now Tagada looks even more confused. Yes. I've been interning with him since last year. How'd you know? Izuku faces forward again, hoping it's enough to keep Tagada from guessing what's on his mind. Wild guess. His senpai's giving him a shrewd look now, one that tells Izuku he's putting a few things together himself. If he does, he doesn't call him on it, though. Huh. Well, today seems to be a day for odd coincidences, I guess. My birthday's July 15th, if that helps. Izuku gapes at him. Shut up, no it's not. Tagada looks positively delighted. Wait, you mean yours is too? Is it really? Which wins? You're 2 years older than me, senpai. Tagada slings an arm around his shoulders. Still counts. Twins forever. They reach the faculty office like that, and All Might looks appropriately pleased. I'm glad to see you two getting along, he says as they take seats before his desk. It makes this conversation a great deal easier. I think you two have the advantage over me, Tagada says sheepishly. I might be the only one here who doesn't know what this is about. Something to do with Sir. Yes, as a matter of fact. All Might leans forward, elbows resting on his desk. I was hoping to ask a favor of you, young Tagada. You are still interning under Night Eye, correct? Of course. I've learned at least as much from him as I have here at UA. Ah, it's going well, then. Sir's fantastic, Tagada replies, beaming. I was nothing special before he took me on. Not to sound dramatic, but he kind of changed my life. Good to hear, All Might says with a smile, though to Izuku it looks a little sad. As you can probably guess, young Midoriya is interested in internships himself, especially after your enlightening demonstration the other day. He's shown immense promise for as long as I've known him, and from what I remember of Night Eye, is excellent at teaching and offering guidance to nascent heroes. It's my belief that they both have much to gain from each other. So, with that in mind, would you be willing to introduce him to Night Eye? Perhaps show him about, if possible. I think he would benefit from your experience. Tagada goes wide-eyed with surprise and pleasure. I'd be happy to. He says. I think Sir would be happy to have him, too. He lasted longer against me than anyone else in that demonstration, so there's plenty there to work with. He shoots a grin at Izuku. I'm actually getting called in tomorrow to meet with Sir about upcoming training assignments. I could bring him in then, if that's all right. He looks to All Might, then to Izuku. I'm free, Izuku says. His heart flutters in his chest, nervous and excited. This is happening. It's really happening. Excellent, All Might says. Thank you very much for your help, young Tagada. I'm quite in your debt. It's no trouble at all. Tagada shoots Izuku another grin. I hope we get to work together. It'd be interesting to see you in the field. Oh. Izuku says, because there's nothing more he can say to that. Well. Oh, okay. Well, then. All Might brings his hands together. If that's settled, then I won't take up any more of your time. Thank you again, young Tagada. Always a pleasure, sir. Tagada stands, with Izuku only a beat behind. Excitement buzzes in his veins like full cowl, and he has to tamp down on it a little. He's only going to meet with Night Eye, he reminds himself. There's no guarantee he'll get an internship, but still. Tagada turns to leave, pauses, and seems to change his mind. All Might, he says, turning back. There's a cautious note in his voice that Izuku hasn't heard before. Could I ask a personal question? You don't have to answer if you don't want to. All Might blinks, looking taken off guard by how bare and blunt the request is. What is it? Well, I was wondering if... I mean, is there a reason why you couldn't make this introduction yourself? I'm happy to help, he adds quickly. Really, I am. But you've spoken recently, haven't you? Sir. I'm not sure if that's a good idea. A wry smile crosses All Might's face. Keep in mind the purpose would be to convince Night Eye to take Midoriya on, sir. Tagada returns the smile, almost. Right. I see. We do have things to discuss, Night Eye and I, All Might says quietly. But not this. Not yet. Complications to overcome, that sort of thing. Tagada nods. He misses you, you know. All Might goes still. Izuku's heart leaps to throat level. I mean, I know he probably hasn't said it, Tagada goes on. He doesn't, I mean he is trouble with, well, you probably know that better than I do. But he does. I can tell. If you wanted to talk to him, I don't think he'd say no. All Might is silent for a while, hands folded tightly in front of him. Thank you, young Tagada, he says. Don't let me keep you any longer, now. Of course. Thank you. And I look forward to introducing Midoriya. He gives Izuku another smile and a nod, and walks out. Oh my god, Nana says once is gone, for all that Izuku's the only one who can hear her. I can see exactly why Night Eye tried to throw him at you, Toshi. Satisfy my curiosity on something, will you? Tagada says, there's a train ride between UA and Night Eye's agency, and Izuku would be lying if he said Tagada wasn't fun to talk to. It helps a lot with his nerves, because his nervousness over meeting Gran Torino was almost nothing compared to this. He can always use the distraction. Ray's here, but sometimes Ray isn't quite enough. Sure, he says. His hands are shoved into his pockets to quell the trembling. He might feel better if he had his costume, but Tagada had advised him not to bother bringing it. It was only an introduction, after all. How did you keep track of me during that demonstration? Tagada asks. It was a decent strategy in and of itself. You were expending way less energy just dodging, and if I hadn't changed tactics on you, you would have worn me down in minutes. How do you manage to predict me? Izuku chews on his lower lip as he ponders the answer. The truth is this, he kept his eyes on Ray. She's enough of an empath to be able to feel where people are, and she can phase through flaws just as well as Tagada can. Between those two skills, she was able to stay on him and make herself visible to Izuku at floor level, so that Izuku could continue dancing out of Tagada's range. Not that he can tell Tagada any of that. So instead, he lifts an eyebrow at the older student and says, now that would be telling. Tagada narrows his eyes with a lopsided grin. It's only practical. Clearly there's a hole in my strategy that needs filling. There really isn't, and Izuku would love to tell him that, but is not sure how to justify that statement. I mean, it's clearly nothing to do with your quirk, Tagada continues. Yours is a standard strength enhancer, nothing to do with increased awareness or perception. So it's some kind of skill, isn't it? Which means it's something anyone can learn, including villains. He digs Izuku in the ribs with a gentle elbow. Throw me a bone, Midoriya. I know there's always room for improvement, for myself especially. Izuku purses his lips and decides to take a risk. That's a pretty big assumption, isn't it? That it's nothing to do with my quirk. He pauses. I can tell you with 100% certainty that it's not a skill that just anyone can learn. In fact, as far as I know, it's not a skill that anyone can learn at all. So it's all to do with your quirk, then. That and acquiring the cooperation of a murdered empath who loves mischief, Izuku thinks. Pretty much, he says. How, then? Tagada presses. How does strength and agility enhancement translate to predicting my moves? Unless it's a general enhancer that includes perception as well. That seems a bit broad for a quirk. Izuku nods absently. That's one way of putting it. How else would you put it? It works by increasing my levels of uptalk. Midoriya. Yes? Izuku tries for a wide-eyed innocent look. Ray rolls her eyes. You're avoiding the question, Tagada says. Izuku smiles thinly. What gave you that idea? Tagada gives him a thoroughly unimpressed look, and Izuku sighs. Distracting Tagada isn't going to work, apparently. Look, my quirk's kind of complicated, and a big part of its effectiveness is that most people don't know the full extent of how it works and what it can do. But I can promise you that no one else has anything like it. His throat goes tight for a moment. Believe me, I've looked. Tagada doesn't look quite convinced by this, but is apparently willing to shelve the conversation for later because he doesn't press further. This may also be because they reach their stop soon after. So, Izuku braces himself, hoping his evasiveness won't have discouraged Tagada from being forthcoming himself. Any advice? To his relief, Tagada grins at him again. You seem like you have a sense of humor. I mean, yes. He likes that in heroes. I'd open with a jerk if I were you. Make him laugh and you'll be on his good side in an instant. Immediately the knot in Izuku's chest starts to loosen. So Night Eye's that kind of hero. The kind that goes for levity. Obviously. Anyone who works with All Might has to know how to smile. Okay, cool, he says, half to himself. I can do that. I can definitely do that. I definitely can't do this, Izuku fingerspells at Ray. Part of him is wondering if Tagada was hazing him with that advice. One look at Night Eye is enough to tell him that he could probably give Aizawa-sensei a run for his money in being a strict, no-nonsense taskmaster. They'd walked in to find him taking a hapless sidekick to task over something. The tone and manner of the report. He's still not quite sure, and the look that the hero is currently giving him doesn't exactly encourage him to ask. If there's one comforting thing about this situation, it's the fact that Night Eye's office, as immaculately neat as it is absolutely lined with All Might merchandise. The clear evidence of common ground is reason enough to hope that this won't go as poorly as the look on Night Eye's face suggests it will. Sir Night Eye sits behind his desk, brows knitted together, as he watched Izuku over his folded hands. He's a tall man, and the fact that he's sitting down doesn't diminish that. All Might had said they were opposites as heroes, and it shows. He's not nearly as thin as All Might is now, but he's slender and angular, with a thin, severe face and glasses balanced on a tall nose. He's very crisply dressed in a grey suit. The only splashes of color to him are a red polka-dotted tie and his hair, which is dark green with a few streaks of bright yellow. In Izuku's mind, he looks more like an accountant than a pro-hero, but he supposes that he's the last person who should comment on deceiving appearances. Here's the thing, though. Izuku doesn't find fault in any of that, not even the humorless expression on a man who supposedly appreciates a good joke. But Izuku has spent his whole life talking to ghosts, gauging possible bullies, and dodging teachers who saw him as more of a problem than a pupil, and he'd like to think it's given him a decent read on people in general. At the very least, he can recognize when people are determined to dislike him. What makes him so uncomfortable now is that Night Eye's looking at him the same way a lot of his old teachers used to look at him when they'd known him long enough to decide to write him off. So, All Might's former partner says, "Midoriya Izuku, you wish to intern with me?" I have to say I'm surprised. I'm not usually renowned enough to be sought out, especially by a first-year student. Izuku stares at him, wondering how to respond to that with Tagada still in the room. Just as he's sure that Night Eye dislikes him on sight, there is no doubt in his mind that the man knows exactly who he is. He resists the urge to look to Tagada for support, because the last thing he needs right now is to show shaky resolve. Make him laugh, Tagada had said. Izuku has literally no other cards to play until he can speak with Night Eye alone. I mean, it's definitely plan A, he says, and prays that Night Eye takes the bait. A single yellow eyebrow rises. I suppose that begs the question of what plan B is. One of my friends cancels gravity, Izuku's words. I figure if all else fails, I can just high-five her and launch myself straight into the sun. He can almost hear the crickets. A moment passes before he leans over and mutters to Tagada out of the corner of his mouth. I thought you said to open with a jerk. Tagada leans back. I think we have very different ideas of what constitutes a jerk. Ray snickers. In any case, Night Eye continues as if Izuku hadn't spoken at all. I don't open my doors to just anyone. I have both a job to do and a reputation to maintain, and I will not offer a chance to any who have not proven themselves worthy of it. There's a strange emphasis on those words that has the hairs on the back of Izuku's neck prickling. An internship is an opportunity, and not all heroes in training deserve them. So, tell me, Midoriya, what makes you deserving of the opportunity that this would present? What can you offer my agency? Well, if I work for you, you won't have to pay me for it, Izuku answers before he can think better of it. Night Eye's face doesn't change, except for a slight deepening in the creases between his eyebrows. Izuku turns to Tagada. See? I did it again. Tagada sighs a little. Sir, please just hear him out. Remember that demonstration I told you about? He held out against me longer than the rest of his classmates. All Might recommends him, too. Quite impressive, I'm sure, Night Eye replies, and Izuku doesn't miss how his voice softens when he talks to Tagada. Though All Might is not often known for. Sir, look, Izuku breaks in before Night Eye can finish the thought. I think we both know how I ended up here. Right? Night Eye falls silent for a moment, meeting Izuku's eyes once more. Finally he lets out a short sigh and sits up straighter. Midoriya? Yes, sir. I'd like a moment alone with him, please. Oh, right, sure. Tagada stands up, giving Izuku an encouraging pat on the shoulder before he leaves the room and shuts the door behind him. Izuku waits a moment or two before taking a deep breath. Okay, sir. A yelp of static makes him turn. It's Ray, standing at the door where Tagada just left, pointing. He's still outside and he's got his ear to the door, she says. Senpai, you have to actually leave, he calls, raising his voice to be heard through the closed door. There's a moment of silence, then the sound of footsteps retreating. Ray gives him a thumbs up. Izuku turns back to Night Eye. Does he know that you wanted him to inherit One for All? Night Eye, who looks like he was about to say something, stops in his tracks. His severe expression breaks into surprise, and it takes him a moment to school it back into something more controlled. He does not, he replies quietly. And I would prefer to keep it that way, since it's no longer in the cards. I mean, Izuku hesitates. Was it? At some point. Night Eye's sharp gaze zeroes in on him. You're the only one who would know. I don't use my quirk that way. Night Eye's voice is sharp and cold. Not anymore. And certainly not on Miria. He studies Izuku for a moment longer, then stands up with his hands pressed to the desk surface. You seem determined to get straight to the point. So I'll afford you the same courtesy. I do not and have never approved of All Might's decision in choosing you. He acted in haste, with his judgment clouded by his sympathy for your quirklessness, and I have yet to find any evidence to the contrary. He fixes Izuku with a flat look, unaware of the snarl building from Ray. If you came looking for my help, or my acknowledgement as All Might's successor, then I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you. Izuku feels cold. It's not a chill up his spine, or shaking in his limbs, or fear. He feels detached, as if Night Eye's words have pressed until all the feeling has been pushed out of him. Everything's at a distance. He doesn't tremble. He sits stock still in the chair before the desk, feet planted on the floor under him, fingers digging slightly into his pant legs. I'm not here about One for All, he says. And I'm not here because you know All Might. That's just how I found you. Why, then, are you here? Night Eye's voice is composed, at least on surface level, but Ray's still hissing like a chorus of snakes, so that probably doesn't mean much. A lot of reasons, Izuku says, forcing himself to relax a little. He can't just lose his temper and storm out, or say something that will drive Night Eye to toss him out. As much as Night Eye is grading on him, he does want this. It's just the first day, Night Eye doesn't know him, and there's plenty of time for things to turn around. You're really well known for whipping heroes into shape, for one thing. And Tagada-senpai says you're a good teacher. And ever since Kamina, there are things I've been wanting to learn. I got out of that because I was lucky, and because people helped me and made sacrifices to save me. I don't ever want to feel that helpless again. All valid reasons, Night Eye concedes after a moment. Which brings me back to my earlier question. What can you offer my agency? Keep in mind that your possession of One for All is not a qualification. Izuku nods, pursing his lips. I'm pretty good with people, he says. I mean, in both ways. I'm good with strategy and cooperation, but I'm also sort of good with villains. Against villains, I mean. I know how to talk to people and read people and make them feel a certain way sometimes. He bites his lip for a moment. I've been told I'm manipulative. It makes it easier for me to find openings in a fight. I see. In that case, Night Eye needens a few things on his desk until the only thing that sits in the center is a single form and a stamp. Let's put that to the test, then. This is an internship registration form. It's been filled out already, the only thing left is this approval stamp. He meets Izuku's eyes. I will not stamp this paper. If you want an internship with my agency, you must do it yourself. I take it you're going to stop me if I try, Izuku says. Night Eye doesn't answer, except for a slight raise of his eyebrows. Izuku takes that as his invitation to get started. He calls his bluff first, steps forward and reaches for the stamp. In all of 2 moves, he's flying into the opposite wall, narrowly missing a few decorative wall hangings with All Might's face. He manages to twist around so that he hits the wall feet first, bending his knees to absorb the shock and launch himself right back toward the desk. His grasp on One for All is up to 10% from pure, single-minded grinding, and he hopes that's enough. Except it's not. His bare wrist aches from when Night Eye gripped him to turn him away the first time, and All Might said that Night Eye's quirk is activated by touch. He's not sure what Night Eye meant when he said he didn't use his quirk that way anymore, but he has to assume that the hero knows what his next moves will be. And it shows, no matter what Izuku tries, Night Eye has a counterattack ready and waiting for him. Every angle, every maneuver he knows, Night Eye sees coming and foils effortlessly. All Might had said Night Eye was the brains, but he has plenty of strength as well. It's hard to judge his build under that suit, but Night Eye is strong enough to fend him off with ease. Not even his more underhanded moves work. He aims for the kidneys and narrowly avoids a sprained wrist for his troubles. Is that all you have to offer? Night Eye asks when Izuku stops to catch his breath. Brute strength and underhanded tactics. You may have learned a few tricks from Gran Torino, but it's useless if you can't execute them properly against an opponent. You claim to be a strategist. Have you run out of maneuvers already? Izuku gets to his feet again, winded and sore. I guess I do have one left. Still at the desk, Night Eye guards the form and belly braces himself for Izuku's next move. Izuku hesitates, clearing his throat quietly. Could I have the stamp, please? The hero gapes at him, apparently speechless. Well, it was worth a shot, Izuku says with a shrug. Is this a game to you? Night Eye's voice is low and dangerous. I knew you'd be brash, foolhardy, and poorly prepared, but the fact that you're arrogant as well only strengthens my previous convictions. That stings. Rei shrieks in fury and takes a swing at him, but her hands pass through him harmlessly. She turns to Izuku, furious and frustrated. Let me help. Her signs are sharp and jerky with anger. He doesn't get to talk to you like that. Izuku looks from Rei to the fawn. He'd been fibbing before. There is one more play. It's not a pretty one. It's not one he's fond of or one he's eager to put into action. Night Eye's not a villain nor an enemy. He's a hero. He's a former friend of All Might's, and the thought of playing this card against him leaves a bad taste in Izuku's mouth. But Night Eye is also wrong. Izuku knows that, has no doubts about it. And if Night Eye is going to help him the way Izuku hopes he can, then Izuku is going to have to show him what he's capable of, all of what he's capable of. And so, fingerspelling instructions to Rei, Izuku does what he does best. He lies. This is stupid. It comes out caustic, sharp with frustration. This is stupid and a waste of my time. It's easy to belittle what you can't have, Night Eye tells him. No, not the internship, Izuku shoots back. This? You? Where do you get off calling me arrogant? He's a good distance away from the desk, but he shifts back and hopes Night Eye doesn't notice. You've been high and mighty since I walked in. Thinking that I came here for your acknowledgement. His eyes feel hot. Rei's presence nearby, and the fact that there's some truth to what he's saying, give him extra nerve. Or that you have any say in who gets one for all. The lines between Night Eye's eyebrows deepen again. I mean, Gran Torino spent half a week making me taste the floorboards, Izuku says. He taught All Might, and All Might was so scared of him he couldn't speak in a straight line when he told me about him. But he never called me unworthy, and he never tried to tell All Might what to do with his power. And you think you get to throw a fit when All Might chooses somebody without asking your permission? Who do you think you are? You know nothing of this, Night Eye says coldly, and for the first time he starts to look truly angry. I never steered him wrong. I always had his best interests at heart, on and off the battlefield. He trusted my judgment for years, and yet now when his decisions are their most crucial, he casts them aside like they mean nothing. Izuku swallows his own disgust and bites out, well, maybe you should have thought of that before you abandoned him when he needed you. Night Eye freezes. For a few seconds, silence falls like a sledgehammer. What did you just say? All Might told me what you saw, Izuku says. And you what? Got mad when he didn't want to get coddled. Is that why you're mad about me? Because he's not doing what you wanted anymore. Midoriya. Night Eye's knuckles are stark white, fingernails digging into the wooden desktop. No. Not mad. Just scared then. An epiphany strikes. Is that why you don't use your quirk that way anymore? Because you're scared of what you'll see. He hates himself just a little for saying that, but it's out and there's no swallowing it back now. What would you know? Night Eye bites out. How would a selfish child like you understand what it means to know the shape of fate and be powerless to stop it? Everything I ever did was to help him. How? By making him accept his own death. Because that's what you did. He told me. It was to protect him. There's pure rage and pain on Night Eye's face, but Izuku keeps going. The words taste foul in his mouth, but he keeps saying them because it's working, bit by bit. Protect him. He spits out. You abandoned him. Things went wrong, and instead of looking for a solution, you ran off so you wouldn't have to watch it happen. There was no solution, Night Eye cedes. I offered one, and he refused to listen. You're a coward. Izuku yells. You're a coward, and it's no wonder he never talked about you. He hits the ground hard enough to see stars. The back of his head frogs from striking the floor, and the impact of his back to the tooth in carpet almost knocks the wind out of him again. He can't get up. Night Eye has him pinned to the ground. He's not just strong, he's fast, too fast for Izuku to have avoided him. Night Eye's voice is icily calm. Have you anything else to say, without speaking so carelessly about things he don't understand? Izuku looks to the desk, then back to Night Eye's face. When do I start? Above him, Night Eye freezes. Slowly, without releasing Izuku, he turns and looks back. Rei sits on the edge of the desk, legs swinging. The ink on the paper is freshly wet, and she plays with the stab between her fingers. To Night Eye, it must look like the stab is floating in the air on its own. When she sees him looking, she holds it out and drops it carelessly to the floor. There's a moment of shocked silence before Night Eye lets him up and returns to the desk. He retrieves the dropped stamp, picks up the now completed form, and inspects the neat red approved glistening on the paper. After a moment, he turns back to Izuku. I didn't mean any of that, Izuku says. It's true, and he knows it's true, but it sounds hollow. Night Eye goes back to inspecting the form. About you and about All Might. I didn't mean that. It's like I said, I'm good at with people. I was just trying to. Get out. I don't think you're a coward. I will speak with you later, Night Eye says. Concerning the specifics of your internship. But for now, get out. Izuku flees. Chapter 50. When Shadow returns to the dorms after the first official day of remedial training, he's about ready to either fall over or take a 3-hour shower. It's a good sort of feeling, though. Since high school started, he's trained in plenty of places, under plenty of people. The change from Endeavor's idea of training to UACE was jarring, and is assumed that every shift from one set of teachers to another would take just as much adjusting. But as time has gone on, every place he's trained that isn't with UA or Endeavor has been more like UA than Endeavor, so he's been forced to conclude that his father's an outlier as well as a bastard. Without him, training leaves Shadow feeling exhausted, but not run out or angry or used. The ache in his muscles is satisfying, not debilitating. Whoa, check out Todoroki's face. A man, so much for the class pretty boy. He weathers the teasing as he rests his eyes on the common room couch. His focus wavered at some point during training, and he wiped out and split his chin open on the concrete, which makes for an interesting face when combined with the usual bumps and bruises. He shrugs it off. Zero and Ashida's light-hearted ribbon doesn't damage his pride the way harsh ridicule does. It's certainly not enough to affect his. Bet Midoriya won't mind. It's impossible to disguise those 4 words as a coughing fit, but Kaminari still makes the attempt. Shadow's good mood wavers. Nearby, Ida and Uraraka are close enough to see him pull a face, and both of them wince in sympathy. Ida rounds on Kaminari to scold him for making invasive comments and circulating false gossip. In the confusion, Shadow slips out and heads to the kitchen. Ojiro is there, humming over a mug of tea as he waits for it to call. Oh hey, Todoroki, he says. Training go well? Went fine, Shadow answers. He goes to the fridge and sighs with relief when he sees that his leftovers are still there. Kirishima got mixed up and accidentally ate his the other day. That had been disappointing enough without having to awkwardly brush off Kirishima's soulful remorse. Your face begs to differ. His classmate grins impishly. They are really working you and Bakudo hard, aren't they? It's been a while since I saw you guys this beat up from training. Shadow shrugs. Not like I don't need it. They stand in companionable silence for a few minutes. Shadow isn't friends with everyone in class, not like Kaminari and Ashida are. But even outside of his group of close friends, there are a few whose company he doesn't mind. Ojiro is one of them. He's friendly but not overbearingly so, and it makes him easy to be around. Speaking of which, Ojiro speaks up eventually. Remember our study group? That thing we did before summer started. Shouto finishes his mouthful before replying. What about it? Well, I was talking to Yaoyorozu earlier, and we were thinking of starting it up again, Ojiro says. Ida was refining the rules after what happened last time. After Bakugo took things too far again. Shouto says acidly. Ah right, Ojiro says awkwardly. Yaoyorozu said they'd run things by Aizawa to see if he had any advice. But anyway, it feels like it'd be a good idea to give it another try, you know. We do a lot of rescue exercises and battle simulations, stuff like that, but I feel like we could do more sparring. I don't want to get rusty, you know. And, well, you and Bakugo are off getting outside training, and a few of the others are looking into internships, so I'm pretty sure there's more we could all bring to the table. Shouto grunts noncommittally. You not really a fan of Bakugo, are you? Ojiro asks. Shouto's mouth tightens. He's never really been a fan of Bakugo. He respected him as a strong opponent and combatant, but he's never liked him. And now, with recent revelations, he can hardly talk about him without his mood taking a turn for the worst. I think he's sort of mellowed out, Ojiro goes on, a little cautiously. Since Kamino. I mean, what happened there was terrible, and he shouldn't have had to go through that, neither of them should have, but he's been different ever since. He's been more careful. Have you noticed that? I guess, Shouto says grudgingly. If he thinks about it, really thinks about it, he can't imagine Bakugo throttling Midoriya in a headlock and spitting venom at him the way he once did. But Midoriya's cautious around him, for a damn good set of reasons, and anyone that makes Midoriya that tense as Shouto's instant dislike. Why are you telling me this? Well, we messed up a lot last time, Ojiro says. We did a lot of things wrong. I mean, the first thing was inviting ourselves without asking, and that was pretty uncool. Sorry about that. He pauses. You think Midoriya would be up for it? Why are you asking me? Because Bakugo's not the only one who's been different since Kamino, and I think you know that, Ojiro says bluntly. Shouto stares at him. Look, I don't put any stock in dumb rumors and gossip, Ojiro goes on. But I know he trusts you more than pretty much anybody else. Except maybe Uraraka and maybe Ida, but I'm pretty sure it's you. And since this kind of started with you two sparring together, if anyone should bring this up to him, it'd probably be you. He pauses. Also, he's been in a weird mood today. I think he went out to apply for an internship and has been kind of off ever since he got back. His food is finished. Shouto nods his thanks to Ojiro, puts the dishes away, and goes upstairs. Midoriya's door is unlocked, and Shouto knocks twice before letting himself in. To his relief, his friend is there, which means he doesn't have to go looking for him. An unnatural chill settles over him as he steps in. Once upon a time he would have ignored it as a trick of his imagination, but now he suspects it might be dead people. The thought should be weirder to him, but somehow it isn't. Midoriya glances up from the textbook he's staring at, blinking owlishly. Mika climbs out of his lap and jumps down from the bed, trilling softly as she slides back and forth past Shouto's feet. His friend's hands flick out. Shouto's gotten better at sign language, he's been studying books and online videos, and he always tries to find at least some time each day to practice with Midoriya. He's always been good at building muscle memory and learning through physical movements. Yaoyorozu says he's a kinesthetic learner. You look like you got hit by a train, Midoriya tells him. Thanks ever so, Shouto says dryly. Did I miss anything important today? Midoriya shrugs. I'm the wrong person to ask, I was gone for about half the day. Internship. Midoriya's face falls. Then the rest of him does, flopping back onto his pillow with a groan. Ojiro was right, apparently. Shouto scoops up Mika and deposits her on Midoriya's chest. What happened? I think I sabotaged myself. Did you not get it? Shouto asks, sitting down next to him. Mika yells insistently, stretching her paws to grasp at him, and he scoots closer so she can properly drape herself across both of them. I think I did, actually. Like he wanted to test me, and I technically passed it, but Midoriya's face crumples. I think I made him hate me in the process. Or he already kind of hated me, and I gave him more reasons to. Shadow shrugs. Why would you want to intern with him, then? You've got All Might in your corner. I'm sure he'd be happy to break out his connections for you. Intern somewhere else. I can't. It has to be him. Why? Because I think, out of everyone who has any chance of saying yes, he's the one who can help me, Midoriya replies. I think he's the best one to understand what I need. Will he give you what you need if he hates you? Shadow asks. Maybe. Maybe hate is a strong word. Midoriya cuts himself off with a sigh. What hero is it? Shadow asks. And what did you do to make him angry with you? It's Sir Night-Eye. Remember Tagada-senpai? He's the one Tagada's been interning with. Shadow's eyebrows rise. That's not surprising. Shadow has seen their upperclassmen wave to Midoriya during passing periods. And as for what I did, look, do you remember the sports festival? His heart sinks. Yes. Shadow averts his eyes so they won't linger for too long on Midoriya's left eye. Remember that stuff I said to you? As if he could ever forget. Do you mean when you told me my power was my own, or when you said fuck? Look, I said a lot of things. Midoriya slings one arm over his eyes. I said a bunch of things, and half of them I didn't really mean because I was angry and I was trying to throw you off. Like throwing the recommendation thing in your face. I still feel really embarrassed whenever I think about that. I mean, I did get in on recommendation, Shadow points out. Yeah, but you didn't ask for it, and you couldn't control that, and you've never held it over the rest of us. Did you even want it in the first place? No, Shadow says sourly. Given the choice, he would have taken the entrance exam and earned his place in UA on his own merit. But no, the old man just had to make him special. It's a sore point and it always has been. That's why when Midoriya threw it in his face during their match, he'd. You see. Midoriya says, voice muffled by the arm over his face. It made you feel like crap for something that wasn't even your fault. And that was kind of what I was trying to do, because back then you were right about being stronger than me, and I was pretty much out of bones I could break, so there was no other way to get one over on you. It's a legitimate strategy, Shadow points out. Not always. He can tell where this is headed. Midoriya has a hero complex you could land a jet on. The purring one-eyed cat lying half in his lap and half on Midoriya is proof of that, now that he knows how his friend got her in the first place. For someone who brings out underhanded tactics whenever he's backed into a corner, Midoriya's kind of a bleeding heart. You said you weren't sorry for using it at Kamina, he says quietly. Midoriya stiffens for a moment, then relaxes again. That's different. That's against villains. Why'd you do it today? Shadow asks. Technically Midoriya hasn't said he did, but contrary to what his classmates seem to think sometimes, Shadow can read between lines. A lot of reasons, Midoriya says. But I guess strength wasn't going to work. I wasn't going to win if I just pushed myself harder. And he wasn't seeing me. I wasn't what he wanted, and he wouldn't stop seeing what he wanted and comparing, so I just wanted him to see what I actually was, even if it was ugly. Shadow finishes for him. It was like he'd already decided what I was and what he thought of me before I'd even walked in, Midoriya says softly, and doesn't seem to notice the painful little pain it causes in Shadow's chest. Can't imagine how that feels, Shadow says quietly. It takes a moment for the irony to register. Oh, Midoriya says. Right. Yeah. More silence passes. It's easy for that to happen when there's a cat within reach. So what are you going to do from here? Shadow asks. Look for another internship or try to salvage this one. Either way, I passed his test, Midoriya says. And he said he'd call me in again to discuss my internship. So I guess I'll go in, apologize, and see what happens. You my best friend, Shadow says. Midoriya twitches. Yeah. You too. There's some hesitance to it, which Shadow understands. Best friend still seems wrong somehow, too shallow, not enough. I didn't like you very much when we first talked, Shadow continues. And what you said hurt, sort of. But a lot of it was sort of right. And now you're my best friend. So maybe there's hope. Yeah, maybe. You grow on people. I don't think Aizawa-sensei liked you very much at first, either. Haha, thanks. Are you going to tell this Night Eye? Shadow asks. About the ghosts. Midoriya looks back at him, then at another spot in the room that is empty to Shadow's eyes. Yeah, he says. I am. He looks to Shadow again. Did you come up here just to check on me, or was there something you wanted to talk about? Shadow thinks of what Ojiro says, then looks at Midoriya's tired face and decides it can wait. But we should spar again, he says. It's been too long. Do you have time right now? Midoriya blinks up at him, brightening. Yeah, he says. Yeah, I got time. Because there's no getting around it, Night Eye calls the boy in for the next free slot in his schedule. And there is no getting around it. Truthfully, he had planned on taking him on as an intern regardless of the results of his test, but now he can't refuse him even if he wants to. He said his terms, and Midoriya Izuku met them. He gives himself a day to rest himself back under his own rigid control, until he stops tasting bile in the back of his throat and the crawling beneath his skin recedes to a more acceptable level. It helps that a full day means that he no longer has the boy's future pressing behind his eyes, demanding to be seen. He only looked carefully the day before, peering ahead moment by moment so that he could foresee each maneuver before they happened. He's still bracing himself, not sure how Midoriya's voice will affect him now when he last heard it echoing his own thoughts. Before the boy walked into his office, no one dared call Night Eye a coward but the voices in his own head. He shakes himself, half embarrassed at the thought. He can remain professional, a few slung barbs will not change that. The boy copped to being a strategist and manipulator. Night Eye pushed him into a corner and demanded he prove his skills, and he did so. He might not like the boy much, but he isn't foolish enough to place all the blame on him when he only did exactly as Night Eye asked. The boy knocks and waits for permission before entering. The door to Night Eye's office swings gently open and Midoriya is barely stepping in when a chill creeps up Night Eye's spine and takes hold, clutching with many clawed fingers until his temples ache from gritting his teeth. He relaxes his jaw, but the unease remains, pulsing like a heartbeat as the taste of bile returns. Midoriya looks much the same as he did yesterday, dressed in his school uniform with the tie poorly done and the lapel of his jacket crooked. The only difference is that the dark circles beneath his eyes may have deepened. The eyes themselves are too bright and unblinking, darting and flickering about the room. When they do settle on Night Eye's face, they pierce a little too deep for his liking. Everyone has a presence. Even the most nondescript, least interesting people have a presence if you know how to look for it. Midoriya sets his teeth on edge and tilts the very axis on which the room balances. I want to apologize, Midoriya says, before Night Eye can get a word out. And, clear things up. I meant what I said about you not having any say in who gets one for all. He doesn't flinch or falter when he says that. But the rest of it wasn't. I didn't mean any of that. I was only saying it to get you angry enough to leave the desk. He takes a deep breath. I don't like doing that, saying things that I know will hurt people just to get them to do what I want. It's one thing if it's a villain, but with anyone else it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It feels like bullying. So I'm sorry. Night Eye raises his eyebrows. That's just odd, a boy apologizing to a grown man for bullying him. The boy even says bullying like a curse, like it's a filthy slur that he's ashamed to say. In the space of that single word, Night Eye catches a glimpse of what he saw on full display yesterday, when the boy spat out venomous words until Night Eye lost both his temper and the challenge he had set himself. It's anger, plain and simple. The boy may claim that his words were false, but the anger was not. Even now, in a display of humility that Night Eye can judge to be genuine, the anger slips through so easily. Coupled with the unsettling air that he carries about him, it renews the crawling and the chills and the off-balance feeling that Night Eye endures stoically. And that, above all else, that is why Night Eye knows he is right. This boy could be a hero on his own. Underground perhaps, with an air like that, with anger like that, with a head for strategy as ruthless as that. He could be formidable, he even has a quirk of his own. And hadn't that stunned to realize that the boy who All Might claimed as quirkless had a quirk after all, that after years of silence on both sides, in spite of his best efforts and an outstretched hand, All Might still didn't trust him with so simple a truth. But none of that matters when this boy cannot be what All Might was. He cannot be what the world needs. What One for All needs. It's pointless to apologize, he says at length. You proved the skill that you claimed, and you did as you were asked. As for your strategy, he pauses. You know the details of my quirk, then? I asked All Might after he told me what you foresaw, Midoriya answers. I wanted to know the details to see if there was any way around it. It wasn't. I didn't think I'd be using it against you. I didn't know you'd test me like that. It was effective, Night Eye concedes. Putting aside the incapacitating effect of Midoriya's harsh words, the plan was so deceptively elaborate that Night Eye has to wonder if Midoriya even intended for it to work as well as it did. What he foresaw in brief snatches was this: Midoriya giving up on the fight, himself overpowering the boy flaying as if in defeat. Its success hinged on the fact that foresight is purely visual. Ingenious. You used the limits of my quirk to hide your victory from me, he says. And to hide your quirk as well. Midoriya's throat pods as he swallows. Yes, he says. Some form of telekinesis, I assume. Or gravity manipulation, perhaps. The boy stares at him for a moment longer. The anger is gone from his eyes, replaced with a hollow look that seems to deepen the dark circles beneath them. No. Your quirk was never in public record, Night Eye continues. Before you started high school, when I assume you gained One for All, you were listed as quirkless. Why was this? They called it an invisible quirk, Izuku says. But that's not totally true. It's not that it was useless or obscure, or that I didn't know how to activate it. It was just easy to hide. It was so easy to hide that I'm not sure people would have believed me even if I didn't try to hide it. But this, his hands curl into fists. This is sort of one part of why I came here, to you. Because All Might trusted you with One for All. And you have a quirk that you keep secret, because it works best when people don't know what it is. So, he braces himself and meets Night Eye's eyes again. I see ghosts. Dead people who haven't left yet. And I think I make them more present, I guess. Just by being around them. And when I got One for All, that sort of got stronger. I can let them move things now and appear. That's what happened yesterday. Since the day before, there's been a knot in his chest, heavy and festering like a mass of necrosis lodged in his ribcage. With this knowledge, it begins to loosen. Such a quirk is unheard of, obviously. The existence of an afterlife can neither be proven nor disproven. But if this is what the boy's quirk is, or at least an approximation of it, then he can understand. It might sting, but... Also, All Might told you I was quirkless, right? Night Eye nods. It makes sense now that he would keep such a thing quiet, he admits. Oh, he didn't, Midoriya says. I mean, he wasn't. I only told him recently. Night Eye goes cold. Recently. After Kamino. His voice trails off. So he wasn't lying to you. If he talked to you before then, he only told you I was quirkless because he didn't know. He didn't mean to be dishonest. He didn't know. He didn't know. Something so basic, so fundamental, and All Might didn't know because this boy. Night Eye shuts his eyes, breathing through his nose as quietly as he can. He recognizes the sensation crawling up his throat, for all that it's been years since he let himself feel it for All Might. Not by this time, but anger. Protective anger at that, and he knows it's absurd to look at this hollow-eyed teenager and feel protective of the symbol of peace, but that's about where he is now. It's such a mess. The pillar is gone, with the world scrambling to build a new one on the way down. One for All is in the hands of a boy who bares his teeth instead of smiling, who bleeds fear and anger and unease instead of reassurance. A boy who inherited it on a lie. And Night Eye wants to help. He's desperate to help, but All Might has made quite clear what he thinks of Night Eye's help. The proof of that is standing in front of him, watching him with probing, unsettling eyes. And then those eyes blink and look past him as the boy draws in a sharp breath and swears floridly. This conversation is awkward. It's unbearably, overwhelmingly awkward, and if Rei's empathic enough to feel half of how awkward it is, then Izuku really can't blame her for acting out, but at the same time the last thing he needs is her helping. To make matters worse, she isn't Night Eye's biggest fan at the moment, so it's hard to tell if she's just lashing out or she's genuinely trying to break the ice. Either way, he would prefer it if the ice were the only thing she broke. He would have had to be blind to miss the merchandise lining Sir Night Eye's office. Figures, wall hangings, posters, and what looks like a small set of shelves lined with audio and video recordings of old interviews. Everything from cheap gachapon figurines to limited edition collector's items. The collection just so happens to include one of the limited-run New Year's snow globes that were only produced for the holiday season when Izuku was 8, which is unfortunately also the heaviest and most breakable object in the room. Rei zeroes in on it like she can smell the price-to-fragility ratio. Rei knows that's a collector's item. It takes one for all for Izuku to win a race against gravity and catch it before it hits the ground. His hands shake a little as he puts it back on the shelf. Give it a few decades and collectors will sell their firstborns to get their hands on it. You're not helping, he hisses. Rei sticks her chin out stubbornly. He's a butthead jerk and I don't like him. I don't care if you don't like him, you can't just shove his breakables on the floor. Night Eye's still in the room. In hearing range. Watching him. Izuku stares back, mind blanking as it makes a wild leap for a possible excuse. It runs through a full list of options before he remembers belatedly that Night Eye is supposed to know about this, that he only just finished telling him. If anything, this can only be a good thing. It means there really is no backing out. It's a good thing, he repeats to himself. It can only be a good thing. He shoots a glare at Rei, who sticks her tongue out and blows a raspberry only he can hear. Sorry about that, he says to Night Eye, still standing by the shelf with the rescued snow globe. He's been apologizing a lot. If he does it too much, it'll probably stop sounding real. I didn't ask her to do that, I swear. She just gets bored easy. And she doesn't like you. Not that that's your fault, it's pretty easy for her to not like people but, The problem is twofold. There is no right way to talk about this as far as Izuku can tell, and Night Eye is very, very hard to read. It's one thing to open up to people like All Might, Todoroki, Uraraka, and Ida, people who know him and trust him, who he trusts in turn. But he's just met Night Eye, and he isn't sure where he stands with Night Eye, but it can't possibly be in his favor. He has no choice but to lay it out plainly and hope for the best. He returns to his original spot, holding Rei's hand so she won't be tempted to try a second time. Night Eye hasn't stopped watching him, and he doesn't seem too angry. Or irritated. Or skeptical, for that matter. Stuff like that sort of happens around me, he explains. Cold spots, swinging doors, weird noises, the usual stuff. Like I said, they get stronger if they're around me long enough, and one for all's made that worse. Or better. He remembers the question that Night Eye asked yesterday, the one he tried to answer with a jerk. I guess this is another thing I have that could help you. If I get them talking, they can tell me things. I can't force them to do anything, but usually they like being helpful. It's not like most of them have anything better to do, being what they are. He falls silent, hoping that's enough of an offering. If Night Eye would just say something, this would be half as nerve-wracking. Night Eye's folded hands tighten for a moment, then go slack. How many, he asks. Ghosts? Izuku says. You mean in this room, or in general? There's just one in this room, but I don't know how many there are in all. It's a lot. They are everywhere. How much of this does All Might know? Night Eye asks. He knows about my quirk and how it works and what it can do, Izuku answers. Some of the personal things, too. Like Rei. Rei? Night Eye's brow furrows again. The one who just tried to knock over your New Year's snow globe, Izuku explains. Would you like to see her? I can make it so you can see her, if you want. After a moment, Night Eye gives a single nod. Izuku is careful only to press a drop of one for all into the hand he's holding. A little goes a long way, the power spreads through her until Night Eye is opening his eyes wide and sitting up straight behind his desk. Rei, thankfully, doesn't try to destroy any of his things. Or worse, attack him. However, she does open her mouth wide and contort her face into something grotesque and sort of melty. It's bad enough visually without the high-pitched grating coming out of her throat, but Rei has never done anything in half measures. That's not helping, Izuku tells her, and Rei proceeds to blow a raspberry with about 9 tons. I'm really sorry, she's just sort of like that. The power lasts her less than a minute. She gestures rudely at Night Eye as it runs out, and Izuku only hoped she turned invisible before Night Eye could see it. He's standing up now. He looks thoughtful, good thoughtful or bad thoughtful, Izuku can't tell. They are not always like that, he continues. Loads of them are just like regular people. The worst they get is looking like they did when they died. Oh, that's another thing I'm good at, I have a really strong stomach. Night Eye raises an eyebrow. It can get pretty bad, Izuku says. A lot of car accident victims. And villain attacks. Buildings falling on people, it's not pretty. I mean, there's this one ghost I know who was stabbed in the head. And the hole is just sort of, always there. Kind of leaking. His voice trails off as he realizes belatedly that a raised eyebrow isn't necessarily a request to elaborate. You get used to it, after a while. Is that so? Night Eye says quietly. Before Izuku can ask what he means by that, he speaks again. And this? Rei. Is she with you often? She's protective, Izuku says. Beside him, Rei holds her chin high. She was only 9 when she died, but she's been with me a long time. He sees Night Eye's face do the same complicated maneuver All Might's had when he first found out her age. What do you mean when you say they aren't always like her? Is there something that sets her apart? Rei hisses at the question, letting go of Izuku's hand to vanish from the room again. Izuku lets her go. He opens his mouth to reply and pauses for a split second when the expected lump doesn't form in his throat. His insides had tied themselves up in knots the first time he tried to say this out loud, and the tears had come so easily, but now the words fall from him without a fuss. I only found this out recently, he says. She was part of All for One's experiments to figure out how to create the pneuma. She died decades ago, before they perfected it. But they tortured her, and it did things to her. That's how it is with all of them. All of them. Night Eye says sharply. The pneumu, Izuku says. The ones that didn't survive. Their ghosts look like hers. It's like what happened to them twisted them and traumatized them, I guess. Another memory passes before his eyes, and he can feel his stomach crawling up his throat as he answers. Haven't seen them since Kamino. And after what they did to Dr. Tsubasa's ghost, I'm not sure I want her. He shakes his head. That's enough sharing for now. Any more and he might do something truly embarrassing, like puke on Night Eye's carpet. He can do this, he thinks. He wants Night Eye's help, maybe he even needs Night Eye's help, but he can't just ask for it, not after getting off on such a horribly wrong foot. No, if he's going to win back Night Eye's goodwill, if he's going to prove himself to Night Eye, not as a holder of one for all but as Midoriya Izuku, then he's going to have to be genuine. He's going to have to give something first before he thinks about taking. And right now, he thinks, the most valuable thing he has to offer is honesty. A shudder passes through Night Eye as he listens, but he suppresses it. The disconnect between what he hears and what he sees is jarring. The boy's face is calm, and his voice is calm, and they shouldn't be. He's talking about death and torture and the murder of damage that lasts beyond the boundary of life and death, and no one should speak so casually, so indifferently, about that kind of pain. No one should be that calm when they talk of villains' crimes. Of All for One's crimes. You get used to it after a while. That frightens him. More than the revelation of lingering dead, even more than how easily the successor of All Might causes pain with nothing but words, that frightens him. That a boy this young, on the path to becoming a hero, carrying within him the most powerful quirk in existence and with it the hope for future peace and stability, can be numb to death and sorrow. That he can speak of the torture and murder of a child as if it means as much to him as the color of the sky. His quote might tell him what that means for the future, for both Midoriya's internship and the boy's future as a hero. The thought of what it might show him makes him sick with dread. Chapter 51. I start next week. Izuku sounds a little proud of himself. The internship's going to last for a month. Apparently my timing was pretty good, his agency's investigating an underground villain organization. He pauses. Not the League, though. A different one. If anything, that assurance only stirs Toshinori's worries. Even if Izuku's first real foray into hero work doesn't pit him against the same criminals who tormented him over the past summer, it's a reminder of what the world is becoming now that All Might is no longer playing his part. With no more pillar of justice to chase the criminals into the dark, they are beginning to re-emerge. "And how are things?" he asks, placing his tea down for the umpteenth time in the past 10 minutes. He folds his hands so he'll leave it alone. "With Night Eye, I mean." "Awkward," Izuku says bluntly. "Things are awkward with him. But, you know, I kind of expected that, after what you told me." He pauses, and to Toshinori's alarm a look of shame crosses his face. "I mean, okay, so when I first met with him, he sort of tested my abilities. And I passed, but it wasn't nice." Toshinori purses his lips and frowns in confusion. "I mean I got a bit," Izuku flushes. "It was like a physical test, right? Of my abilities with One for All. But I ended up not really using One for All to do it. I used my words and ghosts. And I don't think he was expecting that." Toshinori's heart plummets. "Do you mean that Night Eye has—" "Oh, no." Izuku's eyes widen. "No, I didn't mean he doesn't have any ghosts. Ray helped me, just, here's what happened. I drew him off so he wouldn't see her slipping in. And the way I drew him off wasn't," he hesitates again, decking his head. "I took him by surprise, and I don't think he liked it." Toshinori's relief is uneasy. Well, I suppose that's nothing new," he says at length. "For either of you." At Izuku's questioning look, he sighs a bit. "Night Eye has always been stubborn. I think it's probably natural for a man who sees the future to dislike surprises. As for you, well, it wouldn't be the first time you passed a test differently from the way you were expected to." He grimaces a little, wishing he hadn't reminded himself of the final exam. "I only hope it was as eye-opening for him as it was for me." "Well, I talked to him again, and I think it went better." Izuku shrugs. "He accepted it, after all. And I told him about my quirk. So hopefully," his voice trails off. "Hopefully," Toshinori echoes. "It's a work in progress," Izuku says. "And honestly, I think things are improving. And I'm pretty sure he can help me a lot." He pauses to study Toshinori's face. "So if you were worried, you don't have to be. I'm gonna be fine." A knot of tension does loosen from between Toshinori's shoulders. "Good to hear it out loud," he admits. "There isn't too much to worry about. You'll be working with Yon Tagada, won't you? He has a good head on his shoulders, from what I've seen and heard. He's not one of the big three for nothing. I think everyone who has an internship got it through one of the big three," Izuku says. "Uraraka and Tsuyu told me they are with Hado Senpai under Yukio, and I know Kirishima followed a Magica Senpai to work with Fat Gum. Oh wait, I forgot about Tokoyami. I don't remember what Tokoyami's doing." "Ah, he's with Hawks," Toshinori says. "Your choices are all quite prestigious for your first internships." "I guess we didn't feel like dawdling," Izuku says. "Once I got my provisional license, I didn't want to waste time." "Try not to drive yourself to a distraction before Monday, then," Toshinori tells him. Night Eye has no patience for restless rickies who jump the gun. He means it as a humorous little quip, but Izuku absorbs the advice with a sullen nod. "Anything else I should keep in mind?" Surprise makes Toshinori cough, covering his mouth as the taste of blood flecks his tongue. "I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask," he rasps once it's done. "It's been 6 years since I last had his approval." "How long did you have it before then?" Izuku asks. The blunt question doesn't trigger another coughing fit, but Toshinori feels the pang all the same. He wants to say years, he wants to say for the better part of my career, but that simply isn't true. There was a time when he thought it might be, but a little over 5 years, he says at length. It strikes him like a hammer to the ribcage. They've been apart now for longer than they were partners. "That's still a long time," Izuku says quietly. Toshinori wonders if the boy can read his thoughts on his face. He nods, still wrestling with buried feelings and memories. "You've probably gathered as much already, but as I said, he's stubborn," he says. "Once he gets an idea into his head, it's hard for him to let it go." "You're telling me," Izuku mutters. In spite of himself, Toshinori cracks a little smile. Be as plain as you can with him, he says. He has trouble reading people sometimes, so it's best to make yourself as clear as possible. And he's the most infuriatingly practical man I've ever met. He's all logic and reason when he works a case. He pauses then, frowning as he wonders if he should really speak so openly about this. Just keep in mind it affects him more than he lets on. What? His quirk. His visions. Toshinori tears his eyes from his cup to look at Izuku again. His work in general. He'd rather shoulder it himself and present a strong, professional front, but that's what it is, a front. I think he might have picked up that habit from me. Something changes in his successor's eyes. The thoughtful look turns hard and bright, hope and renewed determination mingling on his face. I'll keep it in mind, he says. Thanks, All Might. Good luck, my boy. After Izuku leaves, Toshinori makes his way back to his quarters, his fears put to rest. He knows it's at least a little irrational to worry, sir. Izuku may be a handful, and he may be a lightning rod for trouble, but it's not as if he's alone. He's surrounded by ghosts that Izuku assures him are friendly. Tagada Mirio seems to have taken a liking to him, and is with Night Eye. Heroics is a dangerous line of work. There are not a great many safe places for any hero to be. But under Night Eye's watch is the closest that Toshinori has ever known. Night Eye has always been stubborn. It was a stubbornness that secured him a place at All Might's right hand for almost 6 years. He holds on to his convictions. His good opinion, once lost, is nearly impossible to recover, and Toshinori doubts that he ever will. But Night Eye is safe. There are few safer heroes that Izuku can work with. He reaches his door and makes a beeline for the bathroom. Caught up in his own thoughts, he flicks the light switch and immediately reels back. The bar of soap that usually sits by the sink is now on the floor, scored with deep grooves as if someone has been tearing at it. It's easy to see why, what with the message scrolled on the bathroom mirror in dried soap scum. Little brother fibbed. Stupid Four Eyes is being a butthole. But he's also sad. Talktohan. Make him stop being sad and mean. Doodled right next to the words is what looks like a childish drawing of a pile of droppings wearing glasses, complete with wavy stink lines above it. Toshinori sighs deeply. What did you get for question 8? Which day? Today's homework. Izuku sifts through a few pages of finished equations before finding the problem Todoroki specified. 2 times the square root of 2 divided by 3. The library is supposed to be a quiet place, which makes it ideal for sign language practice. Todoroki even suggested a sign language-only rule between them. Whenever they study together in the library, they don't talk out loud to each other unless any of the others join them. Ida and Uraraka picked up a bit of sign themselves, back when Izuku was still mute from Kamina, but they haven't stuck to it as faithfully since school started. Izuku can't really blame them. Uraraka has enough on her plate with keeping her academics up to par, and Ida's busy with his class rep duties. Todoroki, on the other hand, has little or no trouble keeping his grades up, and aside from remedial training there's nothing stopping him. He can hold a conversation fairly easily by now. Izuku only has to stop and fingerspell every once in a while. At the moment, Izuku has books piled in front of him as he tries to get ahead. Over the past couple of days he's been begging future classwork out of their teachers, hoping to finish as much of it as he can before his internship starts. He'll still have class whenever Night Eye doesn't need him, but it never hurts to be prepared. Besides, it means he can help Todoroki check his answers for mathematics. Or Todoroki can help him check his own answers. Either or both. After a while, the lines on his notebook paper start to blur and crisscross, so he sits back to rub his eyes. You okay? Todoroki asks. Fine. Just need to rest my eyes. Izuku blinks a few times. How's your training? Bakugo is going to drive me insane. You'll survive, Izuku assures him, smiling faintly. Todoroki barely smiles back, just a twitch of the mouth that doesn't reach his eyes. Something wrong? I don't think they know what to do with me sometimes, Todoroki answers, pulling a wry face. Bakugo's problems are obvious. Mine aren't, and I can't exactly tell them. Izuku hums in sympathy. Urashi isn't giving you trouble, is he? Todoroki shakes his head. No. Not the way you'd expect, at least. At Izuku's questioning look he pauses, fingers twitching as he thinks about his answer or tries to remember the correct signs for it. He's trying to make up for what he said before Toda got to him. But this part he fingerspells, overcompensating. Overcompensating, Izuku echoes, to show him the right sign for it. He sees Todoroki's hands twitch as they run through it a few times. How? He says he misjudged me, and that's fine, Todoroki says. But he's also saying he might have misjudged Endeavor, too. OOF, Izuku says softly, stretching their rule. Todoroki pulls a face again. Are you going to correct him? Would that be petty? Todoroki asks. I'm trying to leave him behind, not drag other people into holding a grudge with me. That isn't holding a grudge, Izuku points out. He doesn't like your dad. You don't like your dad. That's called finding common ground. Todoroki snorts softly. Besides, he's the #1 hero now. He might be a bastard, but he's the only one who's ever come close to All Might's level. He's the only one who ever tried to. There's no easy answer, at least none that Izuku can think of. He's trying to rack his brain for one when Rei's high-pitched static makes him turn his head. She's coming into the library, trailing after Tagada and Amajiki. Tagada's arm is half raised, his mouth open as if he's ready to call out, but he lowers his hand and grins when he sees that Izuku's already spotted him. Afternoon, Midoriya. And you, Todoroki. Behind him, Amajiki echoes him at a mumble. Hey, Tagada-senpai, what's up? It takes him a moment and a bewildered look from Tagada to realize that he's greeted him in sign. Todoroki's barely hiding a smirk, and Izuku elbows him lightly and is about to repeat himself when Tagada answers with his hands. If you're not busy later, I wanted to talk to you about Monday, he says. Won't take long. Izuku gapes. He's not looking, but is pretty sure Todoroki is staring too. Amajiki looks equal parts pleased and ready to sink into the floor. I'm good now, Izuku blurts out, too startled to think of anything clever to say. Todoroki, can you watch my stuff? Sure thing. Todoroki turns back to his math textbook. If he's put out by impending internship talk, he doesn't show it. I didn't know you knew sign, Izuku admits awkwardly once they are out of the library. Amajiki has vanished into the stacks rather than follow them out. We learned when we were kids, Tagada says. Me and Tamaki. We thought it was cool, having a secret language to talk to each other without anyone understanding. I mean, turns out it's not all that secret. Apparently it's not uncommon for pro heroes to learn a bit of it. Just enough for combat signals and stuff, or talking to each other during covert ops. You and Todoroki look pretty fluent, though. How do you pick it up? I went through a phase where Izuku stops. The excuse that he once gave All Might floats at the tip of his tongue. It's an easy lie, most lies are, but this one has a bit of practice behind it. Except it's not really a necessary one, is it? Be direct, he reminds himself. Be more open. Out loud, he starts over. I go mute sometimes when I'm under enough stress. It happened first when I was 7, and after Kamina, he shrugs. I figured I'd get by just texting and writing stuff down, but Todoroki decided to learn. Well, that's good to know, Tagada says. Thanks for telling me, Midoriya. I haven't gotten a feel for your limits just yet, but internships like these can get pretty intense. A nervous flutter stirs in his chest, and Izuku swallows it and pushes forward before it can show on his face. I think I'll be fine, long as I don't have to play house with Toda Himiko again, he says with a wry grin. The bar's pretty high at this point. Instead of laughing it off, Tagada does an odd little twisty thing with his eyebrows that's gone before Izuku can translate it to an emotion. Not exactly a good mindset to start with, he says. That was one of the things I wanted to bring up. It's good to be confident, and I don't doubt you've got experience already, especially considering Kamina, but this'll be different from what you've seen so far. Izuku tries not to wince. He knows this, but maybe putting on a cocky front isn't the best strategy. Right. Sorry. It's all right. Like I said, at the very least I'll be with you at the start, and I think Sir's pretty set on having me keep an eye on you. He brightens. I don't exactly have seniority in his office, so it's not often he gets to exercise my management skills. He doesn't take on new interns very often, at least as far as I've seen. He's pretty particular. High standards, All Might had said. And Izuku has a sinking feeling that Night Eye only gave him a chance because he expected him to fail the test, and he would have, almost definitely, if not for Ray. He forces his misgivings behind another grin. What did you do to get him to like you so much? You must know some good jokes. Did it take props, or is he more of an improved kind of guy? Tagada shakes his head, smiling a little. Honestly, I couldn't tell you. For one thing, he was the one who sought me out a little over a year ago. I'm not sure exactly what he saw in me, but I've come a long way, and I owe it all to him. Izuku nods, keeping his face neutral. That confirms one assumption: Midoriya doesn't know about One for All or Night Eye's intentions to have it passed to him. Just try to be patient, you know. Show him what you do best and listen if he tells you how to do it better. And if you can't speak his language, then just high-five your Araka, aim for the sun, got it, Izuku says automatically, then suppresses the urge to wince. Tagada gives him a long, considering look. It's okay to be nervous, you know, he says. There's no shame in it. Izuku flushes in embarrassment. You're a little more like Sir than I first thought, Tagada goes on, a little ruefully. It's just your sense of humor that's different. I mean, he brushes things off when he's uncomfortable, too. He's not entirely sure how to take that. That's a good place to start, you know, Tagada says. Common ground. He smiles again. I was nervous before my first patrol with him, too. So I get it. And I can look out for you. Izuku lets himself deflate a little. Thanks, senpai. And hey, just keep this in mind, it's just the first patrol. It's pretty unlikely that we'll run into anything we can't handle between us. What do you make of him, Midoriya? It's by design that Midoriya arrives at the office before Midoriya does. This isn't something to discuss when Midoriya is within earshot, nor present at all. Truthfully, Night Eye wanted to have this conversation earlier, but it's better for Midoriya to have enough time to make a properly informed answer. The young man blinks in surprise, barely pausing before answering. Midoriya. It's like I said before, sir. His Stroman is driven, and well, considering what he's been through, that's kind of a given, isn't it? I know the media likes to tell a good story, but there's plenty of truth to it. And he's clever, too, and quite resourceful from what I've seen. That's the part they left out of the news. I get the feeling he's stronger than he lets on, and I'm not sure if it has to do with just his quirk. Night Eye purses his lips, wrestling with the disparity in their knowledge. Of course Midoriya wouldn't know that a lot of his cleverness can be chalked up to hearing the voices of the dead, who would guess? But in any case, I don't mean his skills as a potential hero, he says. Those don't worry me. Even if they were less than satisfactory, he's only a first year and they can be improved. What concerns me more is the shape of his character. At this, his protégé frowns. Sir? You spent more time with him in a less professional setting, Night Eye says. I trust your judgment, and I value your honest opinion. What do you think of him? This time, Midoriya takes longer to respond. His brow creases in a thoughtful frown as he shapes his answer carefully before offering it. Honestly, sir, I think he's a teenage boy. Night Eye blinks. Midoriya looks sheepish for a moment. I know, it should be obvious, but that's really it, isn't it? I think he's a kid who's doing his best to pretend he doesn't feel like he's in over his head. I think he feels like he's alone and nobody knows what it's like to be him, and he wants to prove himself but is also desperate to find someone who understands what he's going through. He stops to grin brightly at Night Eye. I mean, he's basically where I was back then. That's why I brought him here. Night Eye doesn't have as much time as he'd like to formulate a response. The boy in question will be arriving shortly, so he offers a non-committal nod and thanks Midoriya for his answer. It makes a little sense, of course. Youth is volatile. The underground hero Razorhead said it best all those weeks ago on the night that the League of Villains was raided. Teenagers are in flux, and what they are at one moment is not necessarily what they will always be. Night Eye knows this. But he also knows that people, young and old, are shaped by their quirks. Be it the power itself or what society expects of it, the quirk or lack thereof forms an integral and immutable part of one's identity. It shapes one's physical needs, one's emotional needs, one's outlook on life. And death as well. Midoriya arrives with minutes to spare, dressed for patrol. His face looks weary but his eyes are as sharp as ever. A shiver runs up and down Night Eye's spine as his uncertainty grows to agitation. He briefs them before the patrol starts. He'll be with Bubble Girl, one of his sidekicks, while Mirio and Midoriya cover another area. It's mostly reconnaissance for now. He balks at the idea of sending interns after a villain like Overhaul. With All for One dead and All Might permanently retired, the criminal underworld has exploded. Opportunistic gangs and organizations rush to fill the spaces left in the power vacuum, striking while the iron is hot and the hero world struggles to work around All Might's absence. Overhaul is one of the most worrying of them, a young gangster looking to restore the old Yakuzas. All Might's time as the symbol of peace left those groups a pale shadow of their former selves. With him gone, it stands to reason that the younger upstarts would want to reclaim the glory of past generations. His plan isn't clear just yet, but it has to do with the direct trade. New quirk suppressant bullets have surfaced on the black market. It's not clear where Overhaul is getting his supply or how it's being produced, but hopefully they'll have some answer soon. Any information would be a boon. At this point they don't know what his quirk is, or even what he looks like behind that beak-like mask. And so, it's time for reconnaissance. The areas they are covering today are hotspots of Yakuza activity and sightings of Overhaul himself. If Night Eye can track down even the lowest foot soldier, a quick tap on the shoulder and a careful application of his quirk may tell him at least where they are hiding. And as for the other pair, no one pays much attention to wide-eyed interns. Mirio can play the part, and Midoriya doesn't have to. With any luck, they'll be in a good position to spot something useful. When it's finished, Midoriya steps closer and speaks under his breath, head angled away so the others won't overhear. Mirio pauses to wait for him, and Midoriya waves him on. Night Eye gives Bubble Girl a nod, and she steps away as well. I can ask around, too, Midoriya tells him. A villain like Overhaul's bound to have ghosts with him. Most of the league do, too. Should I keep an ear out for anything useful? Logically, it's a good plan. It's enormously useful. Frighteningly so, even. Night Eye's stomach turns at the thought, and the eager, hopeful look in Midoriya's strange eyes isn't helping. If Night Eye didn't know better, he'd say the boy was hoping Overhaul and his ilk were murderers surrounded by the ghosts of their victims. Do so, he says, grudgingly. And do not take unnecessary risks. Not much chance of that, Midoriya points out. Aizawa-sensei's already told us that most pros just patrol for show anyway. The cavalier words set his teeth on edge. If you chose this because you thought it would be easy, then it only makes me question certain careless decisions even more. Midoriya looks away quickly, probably to try to hide how he's rolling his eyes. My convictions have not changed, Night Eye says coolly. Your supposed quirklessness was only one source of my misgivings. In fact, the quirk that you do have only raises new concerns. At this, the student bridles visibly and nearly glares at him. I can help people with it. I have helped people with it. Night Eye's mouth tightens. That's beside the point. How is that beside the... There's a difference between having potential as a hero and being worthy of one for all, Night Eye tells him coldly. You may be one, but you are not both. Midoriya stares at him for a moment longer, then turns his back. Night Eye can't see his face, but he can imagine another eye roll. Thank you for your input. With that he stalks off in the direction Mirio is taking. Up ahead, the older boy waits for him to catch up. As Midoriya hurries away, back still turned, another chill takes hold of Night Eye. He rides it out as stoically as he can, swallowing back his trepidation. He probably should have used his quirk on one of them, at least to make sure that their patrol goes smoothly. But there is little he hates more than the thought of using his quirk on the un. He can't quantify it. Nor can he account for the icy dread that fills him at the thought of looking into Midoriya Izuku's future again. What the fuck, Nana blurts out once they are out of hearing range of Night Eye. It's an odd choice, considering that he can't hear her anyway, but Izuku supposes that habits are habits. What the actual fuck? Ray cackles. There's not much that Izuku can say with Tagada right next to him, so he settles for shooting them both a pained look. Either he's gotten a lot worse at hiding things, or Ray's gone and tattled on him. He can't think of any other reason why Nana would insist on accompanying him today. Usually she can hardly be parted from All Might, and he wishes that could have held true today. The last thing he wanted was for Night Eye's disapproval to reach her ears, or heaven forbid, All Might's. It would feel too much like his first experience with real hero work was more than he could handle, like he had to run crying to his mentor because his new supervisor was meant to him. I mean, who does he think he is? Nana goes on, face crumpling into a righteous scowl. Saraiko might have bragged about Toshi's habits, but he never tried to tell me who to give my quirk to. She continues to grumble, and Izuku tunes her out. He can see why she would take Night Eye's words personally, but he can't bring himself to feel the same. Night Eye's opinion on who gets one for all just doesn't matter to him at all. He might as well get offended over Todoroki liking soba more than Katsuden. A light knock to the side of his head brings him back to attention. Sheepishly he looks to Tagada, then glances around in case there's something he's supposed to be looking at. Sorry, what? Thought I lost you there, Tagada says good-naturedly. Your eyes sort of rolled back and you disappeared for a minute. Keep a lookout, now. You remember those photographs Sir showed us before we headed out? Izuku nods. Night Eye showed them photographs of Overhaul and a couple of his known lieutenants for all the good that did. No one's managed to catch them unmasked before, so if they are wandering around Bearfest, he's not likely to spot them. Keep an eye out for them, and for any foul play, Tagada advises. Usually the presence of heroes is enough of a deterrent, but some villains are bold, especially nowadays. Just pay attention to your surroundings. If you don't, it's easier for someone to get the drop on you. Right, got it. Izuku lets his eyes wander throughout the crowds, scanning not just the living but the dead as well. There are quite a few of the latter, passing through but not lingering or haunting. They aren't thick and crowded and choking the way they were in the warehouse in Kamino Ward, and there are no familiar faces, not that he's expecting any. Izuku has to wonder what kind of villain Overhaul is and how many ghosts he is following him. Nana squeezes his shoulder gently. Sorry for distracting you, she murmurs. Tell you what, I'll have a look around. Might as well be helpful, long as I'm here. Ask other ghosts if they've seen anything, Izuku murmurs out of the corner of his mouth. She nods. Come on, Ray, let's go see what there is to say. He almost doesn't hear that, because Tagada speaks up at the same time. Did you say something? Just talking to myself, Izuku says as he watches Nana and Ray disappear into the crowd. Any thoughts worth sharing? How much of a deterrent are we, really? Izuku asks as he continues idly scanning their surroundings. We are pretty obviously students. Well, I'm pretty obviously a student. And considering how bold villains are being, you'd think a couple of unsupervised students would be targets more than deterrents. He can almost feel Tagada's sharp look on the back of his head. Your class really has been in the firing line, huh? Izuku leaves off watching passers-by to look the older student in the eye. I was kidnapped for 4 days, senpai. At this, Tagada looks a bit sheepish. Right. And it's not like things were any better before that. 2 villain attacks in a year, 3 if you count the door disintegrating on the first week of school, 4 if you count 3 of us being in Hosu the night Stain was arrested, Izuku shrugs, grinning wryly. Probably safer to assume someone's out to get me. Well, you have a point, Tagada concedes. But don't underestimate the power of this. He tugs lightly at Izuku's hood. It's something I noticed when I started taking on real internships. Even if you're still a kid, people look at you and talk to you differently when you're in costume. That's why they say patrols are mostly for sure. Besides, we are in public, several different agencies patrol this area, and in an emergency so be here at the press of a panic button. Just keep a weather eye out and we'll be fine. For the most part, Tagada is right. A few passers-by call out greetings and Izuku lets Tagada do most of the talking. He smiles when people greet him and makes eye contact with various ghosts, just so they know he can see them and is paying attention. When the dead greet him, he spares close-lipped smiles for them as well. The surprise and delight he sees on their pale faces is well worth it. Before long, the familiar chill of Ray's presence returns and he looks up with his hand twitching in a furtive wave. Then the chill sharpens to an icy claw of fear and he jerks his head up to look when Ray arrives. Her face is urgent, black eyes leaking, lips curled in a menacing grimace. She waves at him to follow, and her movements are erratic enough that he barely catches her signs. Hurry up, she's in trouble. Hey senpai, do we have a set path? He asks. Not particularly, Tagada replies. Just the area we are supposed to patrol. Why? Can we head this way? He asks, gesturing in the direction Ray beckons. Thought I saw something. Might be nothing, but... Tagada's dark eyes flicker past him, sharpening with focus. Define something. Face from a photograph, he says. It's a quick lie, easily brushed off with the excuse that those faces were masked and difficult to identify. Like I said, I might be wrong, but... It's worth checking, Tagada says with a nod. Let's go. Izuku picks up the pace a little as he sets off to follow Ray, and is relieved when Tagada wordlessly matches it rather than calling him on it. He keeps an eye on Ray's back, making sure not to lose her as they weave their way through the crowd. Oh, by the way, it slipped my mind, Tagada says. It sounds like small talk, but when Izuku glances at him, Tagada's face is just as sharp and focused as he feels. What's your hero name? I haven't thought to ask before now. Oh, it's Deku, Izuku replies. Long story. You? Lemillion, Tagada says with a grin. It's my running minimum. I want to save at least 1 million lives before I can really consider myself remotely satisfied as a hero. And even then it's more of a jumping off point than a cap. Plus it's a play on my name. The English would sound similar, so. Clever, Izuku says absently. He does mean it, but Ray is slowing down and moving to the side, pointing ahead to something he should see through the loose throng of people. Oh. His eyes are quick enough to catch it ahead of time, movement through the sea of legs, small and quick and pale but not ghost pale. He doesn't have time to alert Tagada before the nearest people part and the tiny figure comes stumbling through on unsteady legs. Izuku barely has time to kneel down and reach out before the small, solid weight crashing into him and clings. Immediately his senses are assaulted, not by the child trembling in his arms but the ghost that accompanies her. He tries to look up at it, but his eyes hurt. They keep flickering in and out of view, even worse than the most volatile poltergeists he's ever come across. It's hard to focus on them, nearly impossible to translate the shifting, unstable apparition into the image of a person. The voice is harsh and grating against his ears, a desperate shriek that drills deep into his brain until he can barely pick it apart into words. He's coming, help her, get her away, please, don't let him touch her again. None is there, speaking urgently to the spirit, but there's not enough of them there to understand. Ray places herself between them and Izuku, and he lets himself focus on the living. Hey there, he says softly, hesitant to touch the child. What if she's injured? What if he makes it worse by accident? Are you all right? Is someone after you? She's small, painfully small, tinier than Ray, tinier than Kuda, thin and unkempt in a faded threadbare smock. Tangled white hair falls over her face, parted at the right side of her forehead by a single tiny horn, and spilling down her shoulders and past her bandaged arms. Izuku holds her as gently as he can, tense and alarmed as she whispers almost too quietly for him to hear. Don't let go. She isn't looking at him. She's looking straight ahead, barely blinking, trembling violently from head to toe as she clutches him. Please, don't let go. The tormented ghost screams at him in wordless pain. Izuku, Nana's voice cuts through the ghost's ear-splitting distress, and her cold grip drags him back to his feet. Izuku, take that girl and get out. Get out, now. That man in the mask, overhaul. He's after her. He's coming, Izuku, get out before you run out of time. As he stands, the grip on him tightens. The little girl clutches handfuls of his costume, and he keeps his hands on her shoulders. She said not to let go, he's not going to let go. Deku. Tagada steps closer, hand falling on his shoulder. Deku, what did she say? Before Izuku can reply, the tortured ghost shrieks again, Ray snarls a warning, and he looks up in the direction that the girl came. It's hard to see, with all the passers-by shifting and passing between them. But there, through the crowd. Izuku doesn't need to recognize a bare face. Not when Overhaul wears the mask in public. Lemillion, he hisses. The grip on his shoulder tightens. He's out of time. We can lose him in the crowd. Go, Tagada murmurs. I'll meet you back where we split off from, sir. When Izuku hesitates, he shoves at him. I'll stall him and anyone with him, go. There's no time to argue. Izuku tugs the little girl up as gently as he dares and slips through the crowd. She's slow, her steps unsteady, so he lifts her up and carries her, heart in his throat. Not too fast, kiddo, Nana tells him. Walk fast but don't run. If you run, he'll see the movement through the crowd. Just weave through, you're doing great. Tell me if you see anyone watching or following, he murmurs. If the girl in his arms thinks anything of him speaking to empty air, she says nothing, just hides her face in his shoulder and holds on. He shifts his grip on her, resting her weight on his hip. He can hear Nana talking to other ghosts around him, spreading the word, asking for help, but he can't let go of the panic just yet. Tagada's still back there. Tagada's alone with Overhaul, facing down a dangerous man without any backup. They're both separated and alone, and maybe they should have thought this plan through more, but damn it, there hadn't been time. It's all right, he says under his breath. It's all right. I'll meet up with some friends and we'll take you somewhere safe. Okay. The child nods against him. What's your name, he asks. For a moment he thinks she's not going to answer, but then Eri reaches his ears in the softest whisper. Nice to meet you, Eri, he murmurs back. You can call me Decker. Just hang on, this'll be over soon, okay? She doesn't answer, and Izuku turns to the ghost following at his elbow. Rei's hair swirls in agitation as he meets her eyes, and a desperate idea comes to him in an instant. Ah, that's a little odd, isn't it, is the first thing Midoriya hears Overhaul say when he wanders into the villain's path. You're a hero, right? Did your partner go off and leave you here alone? His heart is in his throat as he curses his haste. It was a mistake, splitting up like that, but something in the air had put Midoriya on edge, ratcheting up his fear until he acted on impulse rather than coming up with a better plan. Outwardly he puts on the same winning smile he offers everyone. Overhaul isn't a very well-known villain, and while that beak-like mask may be distinctive, there's nothing overtly special about it. Plenty of people have need of assistive devices for various disruptive quirks, and it's not out of the ordinary to stylize them. If he plays his cards right, then he can get away with not recognizing the villain for who he is. Ah, my partner's run off for the moment, he says sheepishly. It's his first day, so he pulled a bit of a rookie mistake. I just hope our supervisor won't be too upset with me. We are both fledgling heroes, but I have seniority, so I was supposed to be looking after him. Guess he got a little excited. He's one of those eager to prove himself types. He keeps his speech casual and unhurried, hoping against hope he's buying time. He doesn't dare look to see if Midoriya's still in sight. I see. Now, there was a girl with you earlier. Above the mask, Overhaul's eyes narrow. I saw her reach you from far off. Do you think you could call your partner to bring her back? I'm afraid we got separated in the crowd and she must have panicked. Midoriya blinks in surprise, eyes wide and innocent. Ah, she was with you. My daughter, Overhaul explains, and Midoriya's blood runs cold. She's a troublesome child. The girl had been thin, malnourished, and poorly dressed. Beneath the sleeves and hem of her shabby covering, her arms and legs had been wrapped in bandaging. I see, he says, forcing the disgust and revulsion deeper into his chest where it wouldn't make his voice tremble. I'm so very sorry, sir. She ran off again before we could stop her. That's why my partner's gone, you see. He ran after her to try to catch her before she got hurt. Which way, the villain asks. Midoriya hems and haws for a moment, finally taking the opportunity to look around. It's a good thing Midoriya hadn't had his hood up when he left, or the shape of it would have shown through the crowd and given him away. It could have been, but, oh wait, she wasn't running in a straight line, so maybe. Goodness, I think I'm getting confused. You know, I could try calling him. Are you sure you can't remember? There's an edge to the villain's tone. His eyes catch movement. A small figure in a long white shirt, bare from the knees down, darts through the crowd of lakes. Midoriya turns away, fighting down panic. The girl's back, how? Did Midoriya lose her? Ah, there she is. The villain's voice reaches him again. Thank you for your help, hero. No. Are you quite sure, he asks, reaching for the villain's arm, if only to stall him a moment more. I thought I saw them heading. Don't touch me. He pulls back, pulse stuttering with a sudden spike of fear. The villain has been calm thus far, almost friendly, and the sudden poisonous menace in his tone stopped Midoriya short. In spite of the words, the villain doesn't pull away. If anything, he thrusts himself closer and forces Midoriya to back away and drop his hand. Cold eyes bore into him from over the mask, and Midoriya wonders if the villain will kill him then and there, in broad daylight, if he makes the mistake of touching him. Best not to find out. I apologize, he says. I meant no offense. I was only trying to help. Don't worry, little hero. Overhaul's voice is calm and friendly again, as if the moment of fury never happened at all. You've been plenty of help. He's gone before Midoriya can get another word out, and he has little choice but to watch him go. His phone buzzes. Midoriya is already weaving through the crowd as he checks it, dreading the inevitable message that the little girl has slipped through Midoriya's fingers. Back at meeting point, it reads. Girl safe. PLS respond. Night I might actually kill me if you die. He walks with purpose, but does not hurry. Eri is small and tired, and her time with him has burned the hope from her. She won't get far. As irritating as this little adventure has been, he never expected her to. The heroes were a close call, but his luck has held. It would have been a pity to have to kill a pair of heroes before they got old enough to be interesting. He follows the darting figure ahead of him as glimpses of her disappear and reappear through the loose crowd. She's headed for the side streets, away from the main road. Good. Less people to see her struggle when he takes her back. As he breaks free from the crowd, he sees the hem of a smock disappear round the corner of an alley and smiles. That way leads to a dead end, lined with bare brick walls. No doors, no escape routes, not even a dumpster to hide behind. He turns the corner, mouth opening to call her back. Before him, the alleyway stands empty. He stands there, frozen and contemplative, as the bare walls seem to mock him. She isn't here. He saw her turn here and she isn't here, which means he was tricked into seeing something that wasn't real, which means she must still be with the heroes. The heart of his entire operation in the hands of those sick, contaminated, poisonous vermin. It comes without warning. His unease rose up, growing into overwhelming terror in an instant. They'll infect her, fill her with the same disease that's taken over the world, the obsession and worship that pollutes the very air they breathe. He hasn't manufactured the cure yet, just the treatment. He needs her back or it's all for nothing. Everything has been for nothing. Minutes pass before it fades, terror ebbing, pounding heartbeat easing until he can hear again over the deafening pulse in his ears. Rationality eases back into his mind, beating back the fear. Never mind. No matter. If they ruin her, if they contaminate her, it doesn't matter. He'll fix it, fix her, and if he has to take her apart and put her back together again to do it, then fine. It's all fine. He just has to get her back first. His last time chasing a mirage, probably one of the hero's quirks at work. They are likely long gone by now, with her hidden away behind lock and key and armed guard. He takes a deep, slow breath, drinking in the clean, unpolluted air that filters through the mask. A setback, that's all. He can recover. The thought carries him back to the safety of home, past the plays and apologies of Air's last babysitter, as he reduces the man to a spatter on the wall with a careless brush of his hand. Chapter 52. Midoriya's message brings him running, of course. Upon receiving it, Night Eye parts ways with Bubble Girl and makes his way back to the spot where he last saw his two interns, with all the speed that he can possibly muster. He curses himself all the while, curses the cowardice that kept him from looking into either of their futures before he left them. If he had, then he might have prevented both of them from encountering Overhaul alone. Outwardly he keeps himself calm and professional as he weaves through the crowds of civilians walking the streets, but his heart is in his throat and he won't feel remotely calm until he sees the both of them in front of him in one pace. When he finally nears the spot, he does find both Midoriya and Midoriya waiting for him, alive and uninjured. A third pair of eyes watches him from afar, tapped firmly against Midoriya's side where their owner clings as if she never wants to let go. She's small, poorly dressed, and half hidden behind his younger intern. When Night Eye looks back at her, she hides her face in Midoriya's costume. Midoriya looks worried as he watches their surroundings. Midoriya looks ready to kill something. They don't waste time. They've been out here too long and it's liable to attract attention. Calling for a transport back to the agency is the work of a few moments, and he only lets himself start to feel relief when they are all whisked away out of sight, back to the safety of the office. Mirio makes his report as succinctly as possible. The whole time, the little girl makes no sound, and neither does Midoriya, not even to add to Mirio's account or offer his own. Somewhere between the meeting point and the office, the girl falls fast asleep. His agency is large enough to have its own on-site medical team, so that not every injury requires a trip to the hospital. They are certainly good enough to assess the condition of a child, and his office has better security than the average public hospital. Upon their arrival, the medical team is waiting for them. They take charge of the girl, which is easier than Night Eye had feared, because sheer exhaustion keeps her from waking up. Midoriya gives her up without a word, face blank. Mirio is shamefaced on the way back to his office, Midoriya sullen. At the very least, his protege waits until they are back in his office before speaking. Sir, about what he falls silent when Night Eye holds up his hand. I'm not going to reprimand you for separating, he says. Because I think you both understand how foolhardy that was, and either of you could have been killed. You're both extremely lucky that Overhaul didn't have underlings scattered throughout the crowd keeping a lookout. He looks at Midoriya as he says this, just in time to catch the end of an eye roll. Something to say, Midoriya. We didn't exactly have a choice, Midoriya says. Night Eye regards him for a moment. The girl shows signs of long-term imprisonment, he says at length. It's by far the kindest phrasing for the state she is currently in. Which means that, for whatever reason, Overhaul needs her alive. The same cannot be said for either of you. He wouldn't kill her, Mirio says. He said it himself, if she's his daughter, then. Of course she isn't his daughter. Midoriya snaps at him. He's a villain. You think that's not what every kidnapper and trafficker says when they are walking off with someone else's kid? Oh, don't worry, she's just my daughter or my niece or my cousin, I'm just babysitting for the day, don't mind her, she has such a wild imagination, doesn't she? I mean, come on, she doesn't even look like him. That's enough, Midoriya, Night Eye cuts him off, silencing him with a frown. Mirio looks a little ashamed of himself, and that's the last thing they need right now. Mirio, Bubble Girl should be arriving soon. Tell her to report to me when she arrives, then get started on your report. His protege nods to him and leaves. I'm sorry, Midoriya says bluntly once he's gone. But it's true. I've met kids like that before, and it's always the same story. It's the easiest lie in the world, it always works, and for once I'd rather not have to listen to another dead kid tell me where she's buried. Bulk rolls up his throat. Be that as it may, he says sharply. Lashing out at Mirio that way helped no one. Such behavior is unbecoming of anyone who would claim to be a hero, and it is unacceptable in this office. Am I clear? Midoriya flinches. Yes, sir. And at least for now, it wouldn't matter if she truly was biologically related to him, Night Eye continues. Considering Overhaul's status as a wanted villain and murderer, and the state in which she was found, he could hardly make a case for her return legally. Can I see her again? Midoriya asks. The shift is abrupt, Midoriya's annoyance vanishing to give way to his usual calm, unsettling stare. Night Eye lifts an eyebrow. Midoriya has never quite struck him as the sort to gallivant about with children, frightening ghost children aside. But it does make sense, he might be callous in his words, but that doesn't mean he's devoid of empathy. The exact logistics for her care will be decided after she's given medical and psychological exams, he says. It's likely, all things considered. Midoriya looks relieved. Good, because she has a ghost with her, and I'm about 80% sure it's her actual parent. Or not. A ghost, Night Eye echoes. It's part of how I knew to get Eri out so fast in the first place, Midoriya continues. That's her name, by the way, Eri. But anyway, Ray and Ms. Nana went out to keep a lookout for me, and they led me to her. When I found her, there was a ghost with her, and they stuck with her since. They are too unstable for me to learn anything from them yet, I can't even tell what they were supposed to look like, but they were pretty intent on getting A away from Overhaul. What do you mean you can't tell what they look like? Night Eye asks. I thought you said your quirk was vision-based. It's complicated, Midoriya says. See, ghosts are, they not like living people. Memories and thoughts and feelings, those are things we have, but for ghosts, that's what they're made of. So if they are mentally unstable, I guess if they're frightened or if they've been through something terrible, they don't look right. Most of the time they just go back to looking however they looked when they died, which usually isn't pretty. But sometimes they just sort of flicker. Like a TV with bad reception. And this ghost is the worst case of flickering I've ever seen. It's like trying to look at a cloud of static and figure out the image on the screen. I mean, even the Numi ghosts had more stability than that. You seen the ghosts of Numa? I was in that warehouse in Camino for almost 4 days, sir. And all for once killed a lot of people. A lot of angry, impatient people. A moment later the boy blinks hard and shakes his head. Something tugs at the back of Night Eye's mind, a wisp of uncomfortable familiarity, but he loses it when the boy speaks again. Anyway, I'd like to talk to that ghost later. Obviously something bad's been happening to that girl, and it's probably what drove the ghost crazy, so either they are her parent or they are someone else Overhaul was torturing. They might settle down a little now that she's safe. He smiles, but it doesn't quite reach his eyes. There's a lot that I could ask them. Ghosts have a lot of good information. I see, Night Eye says, and his mind races. This is useful. It's disturbingly useful, even more so than foresight has ever been, and that's saying something. It keeps the taste of bile in the back of his throat, which is a sensation that usually only bothers him on the occasion that he uses his own power. If Midoriya is going to be offering it up so freely throughout his time here, then, well, that's going to take some adjusting. If he could just frame it differently. An autopsy. It's not until he sees Midoriya blinking at him in confusion that he realizes he said it out loud. What? Night Eye shakes his head, regretting his slip. Your ability. Gathering information from the dead. It's on par with an autopsy, only everyone involved has a bit more say in it. The boy blinks at him again, eyes widening. His eyebrows come together in a pensive look. Oh. Huh. I never thought about it that way. Before Night Eye has the chance to say something equally foolish, there's a knock at the door. Come in, he says, and one of his medical staff enters. Sorry to bother you, Sir Night Eye, but could we borrow Deku for a moment? The woman nods to his in turn. It's the little girl. She's asking for him. Midoriya shoots him a hopeful look, and he nods. Whatever is necessary, he says. Midoriya, once you're finished, talk to Midoriya. He'll show you how reports are filed. Yes, sir. Midoriya follows the nurse out of his office. Alone, Night Eye draws in a deep breath and lets it out. All in all, the day has been eventful. Fruitful as well, certainly. He started the day expecting sightings at most, reports and reconnaissance and confirmation of various suspicions and hypotheses. And instead, they snatched a girl from his clutches, a witness if one wants to be ruthlessly practical about it, but the rescue of a child in peril is more than worthwhile for its own sake. One step closer to dismantling Overhaul's operation as well, and it can't be too soon. The remnants of the League are still at large, and the possibility that the two entities might come together. It doesn't bear thinking about. All for One may be dead, but if Shigaraki Tamura gets his hands on Overhaul's resources and manpower, it won't matter. There is still so much to be done, and no worthy symbol of peace to help. Midoriya Izuku cannot take that place. He acts like he doesn't even want to take that place, even though he accepted One for All and the responsibilities that come with it. The pillar is gone, and the only one remotely capable of replacing it has no intentions of doing so. He's a decent hero if his success today is any indication, but the world is full of decent heroes. Night Eye himself is a decent hero, and so he knows better than anyone that decent heroes are not enough and will never be enough. His phone buzzes on his desk. Eager for the distraction, he answers it without bothering to look. He hears silence. It stretches for quite a bit longer than is normally considered polite, but Night Eye knows better than to hang up prematurely. So he waits until finally. It's me. It's Ron, that his heart sinks at the sound of that voice. The last time he heard that voice over the phone, its owner was delivering a sound rejection and is not eager to repeat the experience. He has no reason now to feel reassured by that voice, but he cannot cut out the part of him that wants to. All Might, he says, and his voice is steady. His former partner goes quiet again for a moment. It's been a while, he says at length. Not that long, Night Eye says evenly. Ah, right. All Might clears his throat. Are you busy at the moment? I'm always busy. I would like to talk. He says it in a rush, as if he lacks the patience for small talk and politeness, and simply forces himself forward to reach the endpoint as quickly as possible. I assumed so, Night Eye replies. Considering that you called me. I mean, in person, All Might says. I would like to speak with you in person. At your convenience. If that's all right, of course. I'm entirely at your disposal. It's been over 6 years, Night Eye realizes absently. They've been apart now for longer than they weren't. Out loud, he says, let me look at my schedule. The worst part of all of this is how quiet Eri is. The nurse makes Izuku change out of his hero costume before he goes to see her. Thankfully he has a fresh change of clothes ready, on Tagada's advice. If the office medical staff think anything of him coming and wearing a faded All Might hoodie, they don't show it. She hasn't said much, not since creeping out of the corner she had crawled into, climbing into his lap, and clinging to a handful of his jacket while they continue her checkup. She offers no resistance, not even a squeak. A needle comes out to take a blood sample, her face turns pale, and Izuku is sure she'll struggle. But instead, she closes her eyes and goes dead still, accepting the poke without so much as a sound. The doctors have been kind to her, of course. The first thing they did, before Izuku even got there, was give her a bath and a clean hospital gown. Their treatment of her speaks of gentle efficiency, and Izuku does his best, holding her and humming a nursery song he learned in kindergarten as the needle goes in and out. But Eri stays silent and still. No questions, no crying, nothing that a little girl her age might do during a checkup. Izuku keeps an eye on the flickering ghost, letting its frightened static wash over him as he watches for any sign of lucidity. Eri's eyes track the vial of blood the nurse carries away, then tugs at one of the strings dangling from his hood. When Izuku leans down, she whispers into his ear. Tell them not to take too much. He looks to the nearest nurse as she places a hot pink band-aid on the spot where the needle went in. It's one spot of color amid the bandaging that covers most of her arms and legs. Is that all the blood you're taking? She smiles at him kindly. That's all. We just need to run a few tests. Reaching out, she gently brushes Eri's white hair out of her face and tucks it behind her ear. Just need to make sure you aren't sick, dear. No more needles unless it's to treat something nasty. I promise. Instead of answering, Eri goes back to hiding her face. She tugs at Izuku again until he ducks down to hear her speak. Is that really all? That's all the blood they need, I think, he whispers back. They can't take too much, she says. He's not here. He can't fix me if they take too much. Distantly, Izuku can hear Rei growling. Nobody's going to take too much of anything, he says. He's not really sure what he's saying. You safe now. No one's going to harm you. He realizes belatedly that that might not be a promise he should make. He has no idea how healthy he is, and if she isn't, he has no idea what it would take to make her better. I mean, sometimes going to the doctor isn't fun. Like shots and stuff. But it's to make you healthy. No one's going to hurt you just to hurt you. He looks to Rei, who sits cross-legged on the nearest chair and watches Eri and the flickering ghost. No one's going to hurt you to use you, either. They might, Eri says softly. When they find out. Find out what? I'm cursed. Some small, absurd part of him almost wants to laugh at that. That's something people joke about, being cursed. But this little girl says it like it's a fact as simple as the color of grass. Who told you that? Izuku asks. Was it Overhaul? She nods. Well, I'm sure he says a lot of things. My friend says Overhaul told him you were his daughter. Was that true? She looks up to stare at him, wide-eyed. She shakes her head. Well, there you are, then. Sounds to me like he's a big fat liar. No, Eri says. Not about that. He's right. I'm cursed. She's trembling now, from the tip of her horn to the tips of her toes. I have something. It's inside me. And it's bad, and it hurts people. Maybe it'll hurt you too. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Her face crumples, fat tears rolling down as she ducks her head and curls in on herself again. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. The nurse tuts and fusses, though with her clinging so closely to Izuku, there's not much she can do besides push a box of tissues into his hands. Izuku casts a pleading look toward Rei, but he's more or less alone in this. It's okay. You're nice, Eri whimpers. You're nice and I don't want you to disappear and I don't want him to find you, Anne. He won't find me, Izuku assures her, or he tries. He never even saw me. I don't want you to disappear, she tells him, her voice high and racked with sobs. I don't want to, I don't want. I'm not going to disappear. His voice doesn't feel like his own. It's like he's standing back, watching someone else cradle this little girl and talk to her and brush a lock of hair behind her tiny horn. Do you understand that, Eri? I might have to go away, but I'll come back if you need me, because I'm a hero and that's what heroes do. And if Overhaul comes looking for you, if he wants to take you back, she flinches. He's going to have to go through me. He'll kill you, Eri tells him. The smile takes over his face before Izuku realizes what he's doing. Do I look like the kind of guy who dies? There's something about the way she looks at him, all wide with eyes and gripping hands, curling into tight fists in the sleeves of his jacket. He meant it at least partially as a joke, and she isn't smiling, but there's something in her face now where there wasn't before. He's not sure what it is, just that it's something, which means it's different from the blank, frozen despair he's been seeing until now. He hopes it's a step in the right direction and laments that ghosts are so much easier to read than living people. Nearby, someone coughs in that awkward way that suggests they are trying to attract attention and avoid it at the same time. Izuku looks over, startled. How long has Tagada been standing there? Oh. Hi, senpai. Hello, Midoriya. Sir said you'd be here. Eri peeks at Tagada curiously, and he offers a bright grin and a wave. Hi there. Are you feeling better? Eri just stares at him, so Izuku jumps in to help. That's Lemillion. He's a hero, too. Don't worry, he's nice. Senpai, this is Eri. Eri continues to watch Tagada, which is probably a step up from constantly hiding her face. What's a hero? She asks softly. Tagada launches into an enthusiastic and age-appropriate explanation, and Izuku takes the time to glance back at the flickering ghost. Rei has been sticking close to them lately, circling them but not in a hostile way. That's why Izuku isn't too worried by them. If Rei doesn't find them threatening, then there's nothing to worry about. In fact, he's starting to see something. If he blinks too much, then he misses it, but if he keeps his eyes open until they water, then he has a chance of catching it. Just a flash of something, an image in the shape of a human being. Anyway, I'm supposed to help you with your report, Tagada says, calling Izuku back into the conversation. Whenever you're up for it. Oh. Izuku glances down at Eri. She looks just a little less blank, a little less like she'll fold back in on herself when he leaves the room. But still. The nurse who put the band-aid on Eri's arm smiles and pats his hand. Don't worry, she assures him. We'll take good care of her. We can always call you back again if it's needed. All right, he says, a little reluctantly. To Eri he says, I have to go now. But I'll be back later. I'll do my best, okay? She frowns, but nods and releases her hold on him. Izuku says his goodbyes to her and the medical team and follows Tagada out of the wing. Rei peels herself away from Eri and the flickering ghost to tag along. Once they're back in the hallway, Izuku's conscience catches up to him. I'm sorry, he blurts. For earlier, when I snapped. That was... It's all right, Tagada shoots him a rueful grin. I mean, you did make a good point. It's still embarrassing. It's been a stressful day, Tagada says with a shrug, and that's the end of it. So anyway, intern paperwork is a little easier and less involved than it is for full-time sidekicks and heroes. I'm not looking forward to that myself come graduation, but it is what it is. The hardest part is writing up a detailed summary of what happened. Izuku tries to imagine summarizing the absolute heart-stabbing roller coaster of terror he just experienced. Cool. There are blank forms at the receptionist's desk and a corner of the office set aside for interns and temporary employees to do busy work, which is currently unoccupied. Tagada shows him both, guides him through which papers he'll need to fill out, and is just about to sit down with him when his phone buzzes. Tagada winces and pulls it out of his pocket. "Ah, sorry, let me turn this off." "You can check it if you want," Izuku says as he fills out the basic information at the top of the phone. "It might be important." "Nah, it's just Tamaki," Tagada says. "We usually check in after we." Izuku looks up as Tagada's voice trails off. He's staring at his phone, face frozen in a half-formed frown. Rei, reading over his shoulder, lets out a distressed rattle. "His friend is hurt," she says. "The quiet one who doesn't talk a lot. He's in the hospital." "Go," Izuku says. Tagada startles at his voice. "You're right, this looks pretty simple, so go ahead and check on whatever it is. I'll cover for you." Tagada looks conflicted, so Izuku presses. "Night, I'll understand." Tagada's face falters and he offers a weak, wavering smile. "I think you might be right," he says. "Are you sure you're okay?" "I'll be fine," Izuku says with a smile. "If I mess it up, I'll just say I blew you off and insisted on doing it myself. Just go." "I owe you one, Midoriya," Tagada says. With that, he hurries out of the office. Once he's gone, Izuku pulls out his own phone and picks one of his contacts, then keeps an ear out for people passing by as he waits for the call to go through. He doesn't have long to wait. Ida usually picks up after the first ring. "Midoriya, it's good to hear from you." Ida sounds a little out of breath. "Are you all right?" "You're out rather late." Kirishima came back, and from the sound of it he had quite the adventure today. "Is he okay?" Izuku asks. "He got into a scuffle with some villains, something involving quirk-modifying drugs." Ida huffs. "The nerve of some criminals." Izuku's mouth goes dry. "Hey, he's interning at the same office as that guy from the Big Three, right? Amatika-senpai. Is he okay too?" Ida seems to waver for a moment. "From what I heard, he's still in the hospital." Kirishima says, "Well, I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to say, but since you'll be out in the field, you ought to be careful too." According to Kirishima, the criminals he faced were armed with quirk-nullifying bullets. He managed to avoid being hit, thanks to his own quirk, but Amatika-senpai. Izuku breathes in sharply. Tagada's right to be worried, then. Quirk nullifiers are temporary, thank goodness, but Overhaul's supposed to have a hand in that, he remembers. That's what Night Eye said. "Midoriya," Ida says. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he says. "Thanks for telling me, Ida. And are you somewhere private right now? Could I ask a favor?" He lowers his voice, not wanting the officer's other occupants to hear. "Yes to both." "What do you need?" "It's kind of a gamble, but just repeat something out loud for me, okay?" "Yes." Ida sounds confused. "Say, Midoriya needs a favor at Night Eye's office." "Oh. Right, understood." Ida repeats the sentence. I am not sure if he's here, but..." "It's fine," Izuku says. "Like I said, it's a gamble, but..." "You rain?" Tensei asks from 2 feet away. Izuku startles and knocks the pens off his desk. "Holy shit, that was fast, sorry, thanks, Ida." "It's no trouble at all." They say their goodbyes and hang up, and Izuku puts his phone away while Tensei helpfully retrieves the pens. "You said you needed a favor?" Tensei asks, stepping up to the desk. "Yeah." Izuku pushes the empty form closer and offers a sheepish smile. "Show me how to fill out paperwork." They meet in the evening, on neutral ground. Toshinori isn't sure of a lot of things anymore, especially when it comes to Night Eye, but he knows it has to be neutral ground. If they meet at UA or at Night Eye's office, then they'll start off imbalanced, and that will defeat the whole purpose of this. He picks a cat cafe. Let it not be said that he doesn't learn from Izuku just as much as Izuku learns from him, so he knows full well that cats are a great equalizer and icebreaker. It certainly doesn't hurt that Night Eye is fond of them, or that Aizawa possesses uncanny knowledge of every cat cafe in Masudafa. His colleague says that this particular establishment is known for discretion, very small crowds, and private corner booths, all of which are a blessing. Public space is the only viable neutral ground, but it's good to limit the number of eyes on them. Toshinori is there first, of course, nearly an hour before the appointed time, because Night Eye likes to be early to meetings and because he needs the time to pet a few cats for courage. He ends up somewhat regretting that when the door opens, bell chiming overhead, and his former friend and partner walks in to find him with 2 cats in his lap, one more draped about his shoulders and a 4th dangling from both hands. For a moment the two of them stare at each other. It occurs to Toshinori that this is probably an important moment. It's not the first time they've spoken in 6 years, but it is the first time they've been in the same room, and he ought to say or do something appropriate for the occasion. He glances at the cat in the hands, then back at Night Eye. "This one's called Sprinkles," he says. Night Eye sighs deeply, and that's almost familiar, that sigh. It's got a touch more exasperation and a touch less fondness than he remembers, but it's there and it feels like an olive branch, or an acceptance of the olive branch that Toshinori himself offered. Either way, Night Eye sits down across from Toshinori, which is quite a bit better than he feared. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he says, looking away as he places the cat down on the floor. One of Night Eye's eyebrows twitches. "I tried to picture the sort of scenario that would compel you to contact me for a meeting. I couldn't think of anything short of a disaster, so I came straight away." "Ah, well. That or drastic climate change," Night Eye continues. "In hell, specifically." Toshinori sighs. "I would like to and not argue with you, to start," he says. "I think we've done quite enough of that recently, and less recently. So I'd like to avoid it entirely, at least for now. I know it's not possible in the long run. I know that we've had disagreements that were never resolved, and they won't go away just because I wish them to. But, for now," he pauses to nudge a venturesome tabby away from his tea. "How have you been, Night Eye? The world has been changing lately. Are you doing all right in it?" "Really?" Night Eye's eyes narrow in confusion. "You called me here for small talk." Toshinori strokes the silver tabby's head. "That is what old friends and co-workers do, isn't it? Meet for coffee. Catch up." Night Eye spends a moment staring at him. "You're not even drinking coffee," he points out. "I'm afraid not. It's bad for my stomach." He tries not to wince. "My stomach in the figurative sense, that is. But I have it on good authority that it's excellent." Night Eye blinks, hesitates, then turns around to flag down a server and order one. It's a start. "The work never ends, of course," he says. "All for one is gone, but there are many enterprising villains seeking to take his place. But that was always going to be the case, regardless of whether or not you could help fight them. We always knew that." "You always knew that," Toshinori says quietly. "I didn't want to believe you." "Well, you were always the idealist." Night Eye's coffee comes and he accepts it with a nod of thanks. "Not that that was ever a mark against you. I appreciated that. I could never see the world the way you did, no matter how much I wanted to. Working with you made it easier to see the bright side of things. I can't anymore," he doesn't say, though Toshinori can read it in the air between them. "I've lost that bright side. All in all, I'd say about a dozen different criminal warlords are vying to fill the void that All for One left," Night Eye continues. "A handful pose a real threat. I'm only focusing on one for now." "Yes, I heard it's been an eventful day in Musudafo," Toshinori says. The tortoiseshell in his lap jumps down and approaches Night Eye to wind around his ankles. Nervousness tickles the back of his throat, but he takes the plunge anyway. Yamazuku has been rather tight-lipped among his classmates, so I assume it was something important. Night Eye stiffens and Toshinori takes a sip of tea to hide his nervousness. He knows full well this is unstable ground. But a moment later, Night Eye shrugs off the tension and clears his throat. "Yes. His first day of patrol was a bit more eventful than I expected. But it was fruitful." "Good," Toshinori says steadily. "I'm glad he's doing well." The silence that follows that is awkward and tense and stretches far too long for his liking. It could be worse. The background noise of paws and purring keeps it from being too oppressive, but it's still the opposite of talking, which is what Toshinori wants out of this. You might as well say it, he says. Whatever is on your mind, whatever you're holding back right now. We are never going to get anywhere if you don't. You said you didn't want to argue, Night Eye says. I also said it wasn't possible in the long run. If we keep dancing around uncomfortable things, we'll be going in circles for the rest of our lives. That makes Night Eye wince. He probably could have worded it better, but maybe a little discomfort will move things forward. You know I have misgivings about him, Night Eye tells him. Protective instincts tie his chest in knots, but Toshinori keeps his voice steady. Yes, I know. You made that much clear the last time we spoke. Let me be clearer, Night Eye continues. As a potential hero, I'm impressed with his abilities. He's formidable. He has good instincts. But not every good hero is worthy of one for all. And what makes you so much better at deciding who is? Immediately he bites tongue. The last thing he wants to do is lose his temper so easily. Night Eye is about to reply when the enterprising tortoiseshell leaps up into his lap, cutting off whatever retort was on the tip of his tongue. Instead he sighs, harsh and irritated but still calm. You're impulsive. You always have been. And maybe it's because it saved your life in combat. Maybe you are so used to hearing the future from me that you forget to think about it for yourself. I don't know. But he pauses, mouth twisting. I just don't feel it's a decision to be made lightly. I don't understand why you think I did. Because you always do. Night Eye puts his cup down. Even when I was there to give you advice, you did. Even when I spelled out your death, you refused to stop and think of what that meant or how to prepare for it. I'm not going to prepare for it because I'm not going to die, Night Eye. It comes out harsher than he wants it to, but it's the truth. Not this year, and not the next. I know you have faith in your visions, and I understand your convictions, but I survived Kamina, I survived All for One twice, and I will survive whatever future you foresaw. Night Eye is staring again, eyes widening so slightly that most people wouldn't notice the difference. But Toshinori is not most people. I'm not going to die. Not when I have so much left to do. The staring continues to the point where it almost becomes awkward. And while part of Toshinori is glad of this, glad that he surprised Night Eye when so little catches him off guard, Night Eye's staring hasn't gotten any less disconcerting with time. Not even the tortoiseshell in his lap is enough to soften the intensity of it. Where was this drive 6 years ago? Night Eye asks bluntly. Toshinori blinks. What? It's a simple question, Night Eye says. There's a tremor in his voice now, and Toshinori isn't sure what it means. She asked you to fight with me then, I begged you. Toshinori shakes his head. You asked me to give up and turn my back on a world that still needed me, he says. You didn't ask me to fight, you asked me to stop fighting. I'm not talking about villains, Night Eye cuts him off. I was asking you, years ago, to fight against the fate I foresaw for you, and you told me no, All Might. His hands shake until they curl around the cup again. I was asking you to fight for yourself for once, for the people who cared about you, and you walked away. His heart sinks. He wonders why he never thought of it that way when he thought he knew Night Eye so well. I'm sorry. I know I can't change that. I wish I could, because I know better now, and I know that I need help. This is the hard part, the uncomfortable part. The part that he's been dreading and putting off since Kamina, maybe even before then, because he knows how likely it is that he's going to hear a no. The things that are left for me to do, I can't do them alone. I know now that I can't just keep people at a distance and shoulder everything myself. So I don't know if you're still willing to help me after all these years, but I have been willing, Night Eye says coldly. Toshinori actually jumps. He hasn't heard that tone from Night Eye in ever. Night Eye lets his composure crack when he's upset. His anger runs hot, not cold. Night Eye is staring at him, his expression shifting through several in a row: anger, confusion, indignation, hurt. What is that supposed to mean, All Might? You don't know if I'm, he cuts himself off, pressing his lips together as he looks away. It's been years, Night Eye, Toshinori says softly. I couldn't just assume that you'd. I already did. The tremor in his voice is back. I tried already, Yagi. I reached out and I tried to help, and you made yourself quite clear on what you thought of it. I don't. I had a candidate for you. I found someone who I thought might be worthy, and 5 years of nothing, and I wanted to help you again. You were the one confided in me about your power and what you would eventually have to do with it. Did you think I'd forget after we spent hours talking about it back then? Why else do you think I reached out? I saw my chance to be useful to you again, and you never even bothered to see what I had to show for it. You never bothered to meet him, or ask for my opinion, or just talk to me. His voice cracks like it did 6 years ago. I'm not a fool, All Might. I can take a hint. You made yourself perfectly clear with your silence, just as you made yourself perfectly clear by walking away when I asked you to help me save you. He stops then, hands cold into fists on the table. The cats have abandoned him, driven away by the raw tension that rings in very quiet word. So don't tell me you don't know if I'm still willing to help you, he says, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. I'm trying. I have been trying. You can't blame me for taking no for an answer. Night Eye seems to droop after he says this, as if all the energy has left him after letting out the harsh words locked inside of him. He all but slumps over the table, forehead in hand, toying with the handle of his coffee cup. It's hard to read his face at the best of times, much less this half-hidden angle, but Toshinori sees the dip of his brow and the tight line of his mouth, and it's like reading a half-forgotten language. I'm sorry, he says softly. I don't know what else to say. Why did you call me here, All Might? Night Eye asks wearily. What is it you really want? I'm worried, Toshinori replies. He doesn't raise his head. About what? That you're letting the bad blood between us color how you see Izuku. Night Eye stiffens, and it might be the wrong thing to say or the wrong way to say it, but it's the truth, and it's the real reason that Toshinori is here. I'm not. If anything, it's the opposite. What do you mean the opposite? I mean that I respect you, Night Eye says bluntly. I mean that regardless of the bad blood between us, I have always respected you, and I have always believed in what you built, and what you stood for, and what All Might represented. And Midoriya, he'll be a capable hero. I'm sure of it. But he can't be what you were. He can't be the All Might that the world needs. He doesn't even seem to want to try. And you think that's a mark against him? Toshinori interrupts. It's not. Night Eye, I don't want him to be what I was. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, and if you care about Tagadamiria, then you wouldn't wish it on him either. Night Eye bridles, eyes glinting with anger. Do not bring that into question. I walked away 6 years ago because I was trying to be the All Might that the world needed. You do understand that, don't you? That wasn't just a flaw in my character, it was a flaw in All Might. And you've seen what the world is like now that the pillar is gone. Villains fighting for dominance, heroes fighting to keep the street safe, Toshinori stops. It was never going to last, Night Eye. I might not have foresight, but I do have hindsight, and I can see how fragile it was. Maybe having a symbol of peace was good for fixing a broken world, but it was never going to maintain it. But still, Night Eye insists. He possesses the world's single most powerful quirk, alongside the one he was born with. Symbol or not, that's hardly meaningless. Of course it isn't meaningless, Toshinori says. I never said it was meaningless. All I'm saying is, what it means isn't up to me, because I don't have it anymore. It's gone. It's his. One for all is his quirk, and what he does with it isn't for either of us to decide. Night Eye stares at him for a moment more, and it's enough to know that Toshinori hasn't quite gotten through to him. He keeps searching those eyes and that face, and he sees enough to know that Night Eye is frustrated above all else, and Toshinori wishes he knew how to reassure him. But before he can think of what else to say, Night Eye pushes aside his empty cup, pulls out his wallet, and puts down enough money to pay for both of their drinks. Thank you for the invitation, he says, but that's not what he means, so Toshinori shoos the cats out of his lap and follows him out. Does it matter that much to you, he asks, once they're out on the street and away from prying eyes and ears. What happens to one for all? Of course it matters, Night Eye retorts. I just don't understand why you keep insisting it's about Izuku when it's clearly not, Toshinori presses. Night Eye stops short, but doesn't turn back to look at him. I heard you. I understand that. You were afraid for me and you wanted to do everything you could to help me, and I shut you out. That was wrong of me, and I want to make amends for it, but I can't do that if you keep making it about him. It is about him, Night Eye says. He still won't look back. I know about his power. Do you really think someone so accustomed to death should be wielding the most powerful quirk in the world? I have never met anyone more determined to save lives than Izuku, Toshinori says sharply. And besides, One for All wasn't created to lift up the world, it was created to bring down All for One. All for One is dead now. Its old purpose is lost. He pauses. Is that why you're upset? Because the future is so uncertain. Just because your quirk lets you see what comes next doesn't mean. In an instant, Night Eye rounds on him, cutting him off before he can finish. I'm upset that you chose a successor that has so much less to lose if you die, Toshinori. Why is that so confusing? The words wither away on Toshinori's tongue. For a boy who's grown up seeing ghosts and talks to them like it's nothing, Night Eye's voice breaks. Whether your death comes to pass or not, what difference will it make to him? You told me about Shima and Nana, you told me about what it was like to lose her, how you would have fought anyone and sacrificed anything to get her back for just one day, and you think it doesn't upset me that your student never has to fear that kind of pain. And once again, Toshinori can only stare. He tries to remember when he last saw Night Eye cry. It's not easy, but if he doesn't push, if he lets memories drift to him instead of seeking them out, he remembers lingering flashes of fluorescent lights and hospital bedding and two hands grasping one of his, but then he woke up and recovered enough to stand up and walk and fight again. Everything went wrong, and he never got the chance to ask if they were dreams or not. It's been 6 years now and all of his memories are like that, drifting in without him calling on them, reminding him that the man before him says things that mean others. That language used to fall upon his ears effortlessly, but now it comes back to him piece by piece. It's just enough to understand now that you're impulsive means let me help, that I'm trying, I have been trying means I miss you, and that it upsets me means I'm scared, more scared than I have ever been. He's starting to wonder if it really is too late, if this bridge is just too thoroughly burned now to be fixed or rebuilt. He can try, but if there's one thing Izuku and young Bakudo have taught him, it's that there's only so much he can do when connections between people run both ways. But he does know this, he knows he can't do it today. He can try again, just not today. You don't understand him, he says quietly. You don't understand him at all. I just wish you'd try, because there's a reason he came to you. There's something he needs that I can't give him, but you can. I don't know what it is. You'll have to ask him yourself. He turns to leave, but there's one more thing he needs to say, one more clump of words that Night Eye's fears have dragged from within him. And for the record, I did. Night Eye blinks at him, confused, and Toshinori continues before he can lose his nerve. I did get her back. Nana, I mean. Except I didn't have to fight anyone or sacrifice anything. I just had to put my faith in one boy. Slowly, he lets out a breath. He saved me, you know. I think if it hadn't been for him, that fate you saw would have caught up to me in Kamino. Night Eye doesn't answer. Until later, Mirai, Toshinori says. It's more than he gave him 6 years ago, as he walked away, limped away, down a quiet hospital hallway and didn't look back. But it's not a goodbye. Toshinori is tired of goodbyes. Chapter 53. Shouder's dreams are troubled. This is nothing new, of course. He's a hero, and more to the point, he's an underground hero. If he's sleeping soundly without the help of anesthesia, then he's not working hard enough. It's gotten worse since Kamino. You'd think the defeat and demise of one of the darkest villains in Japan's history would ease the nightmares just a little, but you'd be wrong. The power vacuum left in the shadowy criminal underworld is nearly matched by the one left in the brightly lit world of heroics. Both make for uncertain times, and uncertain times make for uneasy dreams. The Dawn situation doesn't help, with the security system blipping him every time one of the kids gets up for a cup of tea at 3 in the morning. It doesn't help that he almost lost students that night. It doesn't help that Bakugo Katsuki only just let out a throbbing mass of ugliness that Shouder had failed to notice building up. It doesn't help that a handful of his students have already headed out for internships, out into that unstable ticking time bomb of a world, while all Shouder can do is dither in a classroom, hope to hell he trained them well enough to keep them alive, and try not to think about the look on Midoriya Izuku's face when he'd found him pale and traumatized in a hospital room just outside of Kamino. It certainly doesn't help that Midoriya is one of those students and that he's managed to land on the exact same case Shouder has been working since the dust settled in Kamino Ward. Except it sort of does. It does help, thinking of that, and that is saying something, because the 8 Precepts case has been a feature of more than a few of his recent night terrors. The ones with kids in them always stir up that visceral horror. But for some reason, some baffling, paradoxical reason, the fact that his class's biggest problem child has pulled his way into this one settles it. Not completely, just enough to be noticeable. Just enough to make Shouder wonder why. Good news, guys. Kirishima pipes up at the end of the day. A Magica-senpai's gonna be okay. Apparently the attic work serum in those bullets was temporary. You know, you're insanely lucky you didn't get hit by one of those things yourself, Kaminara points out. You stupid. Bakugo snaps. It wasn't luck. His quirk makes shitty tricks like that worthless against him, and since he's not dumb enough not to use it, there was never gonna be a chance. Use your goddamn brain once in a while. Shouder turns to Midoriya to comment on it, to find his friend thoroughly engrossed in his fun. It's so weird, Midoriya remarks without looking up. A year ago I never would have thought Bakugo was capable of complimenting anyone. Well, people change, Shouder points out. Who you texting? Tagada-senpai. Just confirming. Midoriya reads something on his screen and smiles. Yeah, a magic is out of the hospital, good as new. Guess we still have time after all. Shouder blinks. Time for what? Instead of answering, Midoriya gives a muffled yelp of pain and rubs at his arm. Nothing. Sorry, I forgot I'm not supposed to Never mind. Forget I said anything. If you say so, Shouder says, bearing his disappointment. It's a little alarming how accustomed he's become to sharing things and having things shared with him. So accustomed, apparently, that getting brushed off is suddenly jarring. It's an internship thing, Midoriya says, as if sensing his discomfort. Sorry, No, it's fine, Shouder says. It's all right. Really? Eager to change the subject, he presses forward. Want to study together? I missed Cementos covering the last 2 chapters yesterday, and Ida said he'd share notes. He gets a weak, guilty smile for that, and Shouder isn't sure if Midoriya is guilty for letting something slip before cutting him off, or if he still blames himself for Shouder failing the exam and therefore falling behind. Which is absurd. If he'd passed, he would have taken on an internship and ended up behind anyway. Before Midoriya can reply, Aizawa steps in to intersect them. He acknowledges Shouder with a nod before turning to Midoriya. Your supervisor contacted me, he says. You're needed for a few hours. Midoriya hesitates. Do I need my gear? No. Just a chaperone. Oh. Right, okay. Midoriya stands straighter, as if the fact that his internship supervisor needs him for something other than field work means something significant. Gotta go, Todoroki. There's an apology in his tone, but Shouder can tell from the look in his eyes that there are places he'd rather be than studying in the dorms. Later, then, Shouder says, and Midoriya follows Aizawa at a quick pace. He returns in the early evening, slipping silently into the study group that started with Shouder and Uraraka and expanded to include Asui, Tokoyami, and Ida. He smiles in greeting and neatly dodges questions about where he's been. From there, classes continue as usual, or as usual as they can when a handful of students can't always be present for them. Shouder misses quite a few himself for remedial training, which leaves him tired each day with fresh cuts and bruises. Midoriya's work with Night Eye's agency continues, and he talks about it as much as is allowed. From what Shouder can tell, it mostly consists of patrols with Tagada and agency staff meetings he has to sit in on, which more or less matches what the others with internships have on their plates. On one occasion Midoriya gets a brief mention in the news when he shows up with the hero centipede at an armed robbery in the area, though that's swiftly overshadowed by Tokoyami's work with Hawks. The only odd thing about Midoriya's internship is the fact that he keeps disappearing for a few hours after school. Shadow can tell this is odd because none of the others with internships do that, and because they all wonder about it too. When asked, Midoriya smiles and shrugs it off with some excuse about reports and follow-ups and other things that take significantly less time than 3 hours. Shadow doesn't know much, beyond the fact that Aizawa usually chaperones him to leave campus, and sometimes Tagada is the one to come fetch him. And the fact that Midoriya never, ever takes his costume and support gear with him on these outings. I'm sure he'd take it if he needed it, Uraraka says one Tuesday afternoon after Shadow brings it up. Especially now that he's sort of allowed to use it in public. In any case, Aizawa-sensei's usually with him, Ida adds. And if not, his supervisor is. I'm sure it's perfectly safe, and even if it wasn't, he's not alone. They're in Ida's room, and no one else is with them, so there's no harm in Uraraka saying, not that he would be anyway. He's never alone, remember. Shadow purses his lips, wondering if he should point out that ghosts didn't prevent Midoriya from being taken by the lake. In spite of his silence, Uraraka seems to read his thoughts on his face. You know, you could just tell him you're worried about him. You guys share everything with each other, right? She wriggles her eyebrows like it's a joke, which makes no sense because it's almost true. Not everything, Shadow says. Especially not now, since he's out working real missions. There are a lot of things he can't tell me. And besides, how I feel about it is my problem, not his. He has enough on his plate without having to worry about my feelings. The room goes quiet for a while, aside from the scratching of pencils. It's Ida who clears his throat and tries to shift things again. Well, speaking of having things on our plates, how is your own training coming along? You've clearly been working hard. Is it true that Gang Orca's been helping train you? Uraraka asks, jumping on this new thread. What's he like as a teacher? Shadow purses his lips and tries not to cringe. As the hero in charge of conducting the exams, assessing the students, and therefore failing most of them, Gang Orca has been a frequent and active overseer in remedial training. He was like a drill sergeant at first. He's eased up a little, but is still strict. That sounds tough, Uraraka says. It's not, really, Shadow's voice trails off. You've come back looking more battered than normal, Ida says carefully. So he must at least be tougher than Aizawa-sensei. I guess. Uraraka makes a strangled noise. I can't even imagine that. And the problem is, Shadow can. He can imagine a tougher teacher than Aizawa, and he can imagine a tougher teacher than Gang Orca. But he's not sure he can say that out loud, because the only person outside of his family who has an inkling of why is Midoriya. Midoriya, who probably knows more than even Shadow has told him, because apparently he's been talking to ghosts about it. But wait, Uraraka says. It can't just be about fighting, can it? Because, well, honestly, you're a better fighter than most of the class, and if passing the exams was all about how good you are at fighting, then it wouldn't really make sense for them to have higher standards in remedial training than they did in the actual exam. You're right, Shadow says. They don't. It's not about physical abilities. I've been fine with combat training. It might look bad when I come back, but that part is simple. Well, that's good, then. Ida's tone is encouraging. It's good to have something you excel at. Shadow shuts his eyes. Hopeless, Gang Orca scoffed. Absolutely hopeless. I had the second best time out of everyone here, Shadow pointed out. I'll say you did, here being remedial training. And you might have been fast, but you were sloppy. Not so much to brag about after all, HN. I don't know why you're complaining, Shadow gritted out before he could stop himself. You were the one who told me to run the course. You were the one who decided to time it. Orca rounded on him, wide mouth opening, and Shadow braced himself to ride out another tirade. But instead, the hero closed his mouth, pulled back, and seemed to consider him for a moment. It wasn't until Shadow's spine lost its tension that he spoke again. Is that what you think you're here for, kid? He asked, his voice gruff but less of a shout. Doing as you're told. Shadow blinked, confused by the question. I mean, he hesitated. What else is there? That's what you're here for. Wrong, Orca said. I'm not here to tell you what to do, I'm here to teach YA. Is there a difference? Shadow asked dryly. You think there's no difference? Orca didn't have eyebrows, but his tone gave the impression that he'd be raising one if he did. You think you are here to follow orders? Tell me then, if I trotted out a line of rowdy kindergartners and told you to give each one a sock in the mouth, what would you do? Shadow stared at him. I'd probably try to figure out what you actually wanted from me. Orca barked out a laugh. Good answer. So, now that we've established that you ain't here to jump when I tell why are you here, then? So I can pass the exams in spring, Shadow answered readily. Why? Gang Orca asked. To get my provisional license. Are you asking me or telling me? Why? Shadow frowned. So I can catch up to my classmates. The hero nodded. Why? Shadow's draining patience almost ran out then and there. Because I'm trying to be a hero. Why? I don't, Shadow sighed sharply. That's why everyone's here, isn't it? To become a hero. I don't know what else you want from me. And finally we have our problem. Gang Orca spread his arms wide. 'Cause when you get right down to it, you don't know, do you? And that right there, that's why you're sloppy. That's why nobody knows what the hell we are supposed to do with you. 'Cause at this point, you don't even know. Either none of this matters to you, or you can't figure out why it should. You want to be a hero, that's fine, but why? Trying to make Daddy proud. The tension snapped back into place. No. All right then, Orca said, raising his hands in a placating manner. Fair enough, didn't mean to touch a nerve. But here's a bit of homework for you, and I'm gonna have words with Eraserhead so he makes sure you do it. Over the next couple weeks, I want you to think on that. Think on why. 'Cause I want you to figure out just what the hell you're doing here and why it matters so much to you. And if you can't think of anything, well, then maybe you ought to think about whether or not you should be here at all. Todoroki. Hey, did you fall asleep? No, Shadow says, opening his eyes. Just thinking. About training. You know, there is something you should keep in mind, Uraraka points out. You basically failed on a technicality. You literally got sabotaged. As long as villains don't crash the makeup exams, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Regardless, if there's one thing you've proven, it's that you're strong, Ida says. If you keep cultivating that strength, then Uraraka's right, you have more than what it takes. Shadow nods, but is not sure he believes it. He's almost sure that he could become a hero on strength alone, but is a lot less sure that he would want to. After all, if combat skill is his only saving grace, then what difference would there be between him and Endeavor? It takes almost 2 weeks, but the wait is worth it. Eri talks now. Not that she was mute before, but she's starting to speak first instead of wait to be spoken to. The nurses read her stories and let her watch cartoons, and sometimes she'll tell Izuku about them when he comes by. Sometimes she'll ask for stories or for pictures of his cat, and he'll provide them to the best of his ability. Sometimes Tagada is there too, and he'll listen intently to everything Eri says and, if asked, regale them both with stories about what he and Amataki got up to when they were little kids. Their role is fairly simple, since they both work together to rescue her. Eri has latched onto them as a safe place, Izuku especially. So he visits to help keep her calm and comfortable, and to observe her progress and report back to Night Eye. She's been through a lot of tests, evaluations, and minor medical procedures since coming here, partly to treat the health problems from her imprisonment, but also to try and figure out exactly what happened to her. The nurses say his visits keep her from panicking at the sight of a stethoscope. But Eri isn't the only reason Izuku keeps coming back. Day by day, piece by piece, the ghost who hovers close to her starts coming together. He is every bit as skittish, elusive, and incoherent as Izuku expects. He speaks little, whispers to aid volumes that Izuku can barely hear, and vanishes whenever he catches Izuku staring. Today, Izuku finds him sitting by Air, watching her look at the pictures in a book. His form is clearer than it was yesterday. He's a man in his 30s with pale, wavy hair and a face that, if Izuku looks carefully, has a few notes in common with Air. He's almost definitely a relative and possibly her real father. Izuku is careful not to look at him as he walks in and sits down. Rei, on the other hand, plops down near him and crosses her legs, watching Eri with him. Out of the corner of his eye he sees the ghost hesitate, hand wringing in midair, before finally reaching up to pat Rei's hair. Ray beans. It's progress. They gave me books, Era says. Sometimes they read to me. But there's lots of pictures. What's that one? Izuku asks. From what he can tell, it's a kid's book about rainforests. Eri is currently engrossed in a photograph of a bright green tree frog. Oh, that one reminds me of one of my friends. She's sort of froggy, she can jump like one, and she's got a long tongue. Era looks up, wide-eyed. How long? Well, if she was sitting with us, right here, she could reach that wall with it, easy. Izuku points. Era looks. It's really strong, too. One time she picked me up with it. With a nod, Era turns back to the frog picture and runs her finger over it, pausing on its bright red eyes. It has eyes like me, she says. So it does. He reads the caption beneath the picture. It's called a red-eyed tree frog, actually. Era gives a soft "er." She turns the page and gasps softly at the three-toed sloth she finds. With one eye on the ghosts, Izuku scoots closer and softly reads to her from the page. Eri absorbs it quietly, face sullen, as if the fact that sloths move so slowly that moss grows on their fur is of the utmost importance to her. Izuku hears the ghost mutter something and shift. After a little while of looking at books, Eri tugs on his sleeve. I have to get a shot, she says. Izuku tries not to wince. It's inevitable, since Eri's past imprisonment means she's not vaccinated. But shots mean needles, and Eri looks at needles the way most people would look at live grenades. Oh, that's not fun. I've had shots before. They said they have to poke, Eri says. You told them, right? You told them not to take too much. They won't take anything at all, Izuku assures her. Shots aren't to take blood. They are to keep you from getting sick. Promise. I've had them, and I'll have to have more eventually. Era doesn't seem convinced. I'll come with you. If it gets scary, you can look away. I bet if we ask, they'll let us bring the book. She's calm when the nurses come to take them into a different room, and true to Izuku's word, they let her bring the book. Era watches in silence as one of the nurse explains vaccines in simple terms, then turns away to look at monkeys when the needle goes in. It's the same as always, she doesn't flinch or wriggle or cry. She goes still and limp under Izuku's arm, shutting her eyes until it's over. Do shots help curses? She asks afterward. The ghost shudders and makes a distressed noise. Not that I know of, Izuku says. She looks crestfallen. But she wouldn't need one of those. You're a little sick, but you're not cursed. He said I was, she tells him, looking him in the eye. He said I was cursed, and he was smart. He knew things. Overhaul. She nods. He was a doctor too. With the mask and the needles, and her hands grasp at his shirt, shaking as they squeeze into fists. I'm cursed. All I do is hurt people. He said. No. I believe you. But Izuku holds her hands. That's not true. Just because he said so doesn't mean it's true. Sometimes, he pauses. Sometimes, bad people say things that aren't true. She sniffles. It's not that they're wrong or that they're not smart. It's that they lie. Why, she whispers. Lots of reasons. Sometimes it's to scare us. One time, his throat nearly squeezes itself shut. One time, someone tried to lie to me like that. Because he wanted something from me, but he couldn't just take it, so he tried to make me choose to help him. Did it work? She asks. Izuku swallows painfully. No. It could have. I had help. I wasn't alone. Oh. She sniffles again. He took. It hurt. This is important. He's not sure what it means, but he has a feeling Night Eye will want to know about it. For now, though, he hugs her close. It's okay. It's not your fault. You were alone, and he used you, and that was wrong of him, and you are not cursed. He was wrong. Her voice is muffled into his chest. You don't know that. I do, he says. I've met people like that. I've met the people they hurt to get what they want. I know whose fault it is, and it's not yours. I don't want to hurt you, Era tells him. You won't. I don't want him to hurt you. Izuku grinds his teeth. He won't. At this, Eri pushes back from him. Her face is shiny with tears. He will, she says. If he finds me, he will. Eri. He'll take you apart. And he won't put you back together, not like me. Izuku goes cold. Nearby, the ghost lets out a choked sob. Eri, his voice catches. Eri, you saying he's taken you apart? And put you back together? It takes a long while for Eri to finally nod. That's why you can't let them take too much, she says. When he takes too much, he takes me apart and puts me back together. Why they can't? They can't put me back together here. Not like him. No. Izuku jumps, not just because of the sharp cry, but because there are hands on him, fingers digging into his shoulders hard enough to bruise. In a few minutes he'll worry about whether or not he spooked Eri by twitching like that, but for now, the ghost that follows her is taking up all of his attention. Don't let him touch her. Izuku can't see his eyes, but the rest of his pallid face is twisted with horror. Don't let him, please. He wants her quirk, and you don't know. You don't know what he's done. He only lets go when Rei drags him back. Izuku blinks his watering eyes, and both ghosts are gone when he opens them. It's nearly 5:30 when Eri starts to droop sleepily and Izuku's visit ends. Reluctantly he leaves her in the care of nurses and makes his way back to Night Eye's office. Rei rejoins him on the way, but the ghost that follows Eri is nowhere to be seen. Did he tell you anything? Izuku asks. Rei scowls, then sticks out her tongue and twirls her finger by her ear. That's mean, he chides her, and Rei kicks a pebble and sends it skittering down the sidewalk. We don't know what he's been through, or how he died. We don't know anything. It comes out more forceful and irritable than he likes. After a moment, Rei slips her hand into his and squeezes. I don't want to lose her, Izuku says quietly. Overhaul's still out there and we don't know what he wants or why he wants her. She's scared and she doesn't trust anything, and I just know she doesn't believe me when I tell her no one's going to hurt her. His voice cracks. We got her out, we got her away from him, but what good is that if she's still trapped and scared in? Another squeeze. I don't know what else to do, he says. I don't know how else I can help her. Rei points ahead to the front door of Night Eye's agency. She points forcefully, jabbing her finger in midair, then lets go of his hand so she can mime glasses over her eyes and pull an exaggerated long face. In spite of himself, Izuku laughs. Okay, I get your point. You're right. Night I'll know what to do with all of this. He takes a deep breath, then lets it out. Just wish I had more to give him. Maybe Air's ghost will be more clear-headed tomorrow. Knowing that Overhaul wants her quirk is something, but it'd be nice to know what a quirk actually is. By the time he gives Night Eye his report, he's composed himself. He finishes quickly, then meets up with Tagada to head back to UA. Unfortunately, Ida is busy corralling some of their classmates in the kitchen when Izuku gets back, but luckily Todoroki has a copy of his notes from Cementos' class. Ida's notes are always neat, organized, and comprehensive. Reading them is as good as sitting through the actual class. It's also nice to unwind and think of other things for a while. His cryptic conversation with Era still sticks in his mind, and Todoroki's calm presence helps him bounce back faster. As they pass the evening in Izuku's room, Todoroki is quieter than usual. It's not a calm sort of quiet. If Izuku were to call it anything, he would probably pick morose. Did your dad call you today? Izuku asks as he nearly finishes taking notes on Ida's notes. No. Todoroki looks vaguely baffled. I haven't heard from him since the exams. Why? You look upset. He's usually the reason. Is it remedial training, then? The face Todoroki pulls tells him he's a lot closer to the mark. I'm here to study, not whine about my progress. School, Izuku points out. And you never complain when I whine about things. Todoroki mutters something under his breath, sitting back to lean against the side of Izuku's bed. What was that? You have enough on your plate, don't you? When Todoroki says that, there's a note of something in his voice that Izuku can't place. I'm not the only one who has an internship, you know. I know, Todoroki says. No one else gets called away almost every day, though. And with your track record for getting into trouble, you can't blame me for worrying. You always say the sweetest things. Izuku makes sure to say it in an exaggerated drawl. When Todoroki doesn't answer immediately, he tries again. But seriously, what's up with your training? Is it that thing you said before, about how they don't know what to do with you? Hino's not here at the moment, so he can't just look to him for help. That sounds like the opposite of a problem, you know. If they don't know what to teach you, then maybe that means you're good. Todoroki shakes his head. They figured it out, he says. Well, Gang Orca figured it out. What? I don't know what I'm doing, Todoroki says it in a rush. It's like I don't know why anymore. Izuku frowns. Why? Why I'm here? Why I'm doing any of this? I can think of some reasons and they aren't wrong, but they don't feel right either. They are either too small or too incomplete or... Is that important? Izuku asks. Isn't it? Todoroki shoots him a pained look. I want to be a hero. If possible, I want to be the best. Isn't it important to have a reason? This is a lot heavier than he expected. I've never really minded much about people's reasons for being a hero. I think it's good to save lives for any reason. But there should be one, Todoroki insists. And with me, it used to be so clear. It was so simple, back when all I wanted was to spite my father by climbing to the top without using fire. But it was stupid and selfish and you helped me see that, but now that's gone and it's not my reason anymore, and Endeavor's #1 already, so even if I did want anything to do with his stupid plans, there's no point to them anyway. And at the exam, with Urashi and Toga Himiko. Izuku bridles. There is nothing you can say to convince me that any of that was your fault. It doesn't matter if it was my fault, Todoroki snaps back. All it did was prove that I still can't separate myself and my life from him. Every reason I've ever had to become a hero is either gone or changed, or it doesn't fit anymore, and I don't know what to put in its place. He hesitates. I want to help my mother. I want to prove myself. There are certain people that I want them to be proud of me. And those are all true, and they are all reasons, but they just don't feel like enough. Well, what's enough? Izuku asks. Uraraka's trying to be a hero so she can support her parents. Just because it isn't big and poetic doesn't mean it's not a good reason. But at least she's sure of it. You're all sure of it, Uraraka, and Ida taking his brother's name, and Todoroki hesitates. And then there's you and that box. Izuku shoots a glance at the space beneath his bed, where he last shoved a locked box after he showed its contents to his friends and All Might. What about the box? It's just Todoroki's line of vision follows his, and then it changes as his eyes flicker around, as if he's wondering how many ghosts are in the room with them. How do you do that? Do what? How do you just know the right way? Well, Izuku wrings his hands in agitation. I kind of don't. I'll be perfectly honest, I've spent most of today and a lot of previous days feeling pretty helpless. I've just never seen you doubt yourself before, Todoroki tells him. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've seen you scared, and you get flustered for the weirdest reasons, and you've pulled a lot of incredibly stupid moves. Thanks, Izuku says. But you always know what you want, Todoroki says. Even if you don't know how to get it, you know what you want and why you want it, and I don't. And that's my problem, according to Game Orca. I'm not sure about why anymore. Izuku sits and thinks and lets Todoroki's words sink in. Can I ask one question? What's wrong with the reasons you told me before? Like helping your mom and proving yourself and making people proud. Why aren't they enough? They just feel shallow, Todoroki says. It's all about me, my family, my problems, my feelings. Once again, exhibit Uraraka, Izuku says. Are you saying she doesn't deserve to be a hero? Of course not, Todoroki retorts. I just feel like I've been selfish for most of life, so if I really want to change things, shouldn't I do the opposite? That's not selfish, though, Izuku points out. It's just personal. Being a hero is kind of personal for me, too. Todoroki frowns in confusion. Don't look so surprised, Izuku says. I just want to save lives because I've spent my whole life talking to people who weren't ready to die. Hey, sensei. Usually Shouder is the one to approach Midoriya on days he visits the hospital. But this time, his student hangs back in the classroom until the rest of the class has already filed out. What is it, Midoriya? His student purses his lips before speaking. You'll probably tell me no, he says. I don't know if it's a good idea or if it's risky. But I wanted to ask you. I should probably talk to Night Eye about this too, but I thought I'd start with you since you're probably involved in remedial training. Shouder's eyes narrow. Midoriya's talking like he's trying to dance around several secrets at once, and that never bodes well, especially not when Midoriya's involved, because with Midoriya it means something. What? He's not sure, but something. What's this about? Midoriya tells him. Shouder, against all odds, doesn't tell him no. Today is a good day for A. It's good because she feels better than she did yesterday, and because the nurses are nice even though some of them are different, and because there are no shots today. The band-aid from yesterday's is bright purple and she's decided that she likes purple. It's good because she found a stuffed rabbit she likes in the bag of toys one of the new nurses brought. It's good because Deku is coming soon. Nurse Mitsu says Deku's coming with someone else, and it's not Lemillion like it usually is. It's someone new, someone Era doesn't know, and she's not sure what she thinks of that. She hears him coming this time. Usually she doesn't. Deku is good at sneaking, of course he is, since he sneaked her away from him. But this time she hears his voice and someone else's voice, and then there they are. Hi, A. Deku plops down to the floor beside her. The other one stays back, watching her, but not in a scary way. Mostly he just looks kind of confused. I brought a friend today. Do you want to meet him? It's okay if you say no. He always says that whenever he asks her a yes or no question. Eri thinks he might actually mean it. But still, she nods. If he's Deku's friend, then he has to be nice. Deku waves him over and pulls on him until he sits down. This is Shouder. He's a hero too, like me. A hero? Eri has met heroes. She's still not sure what they are, but Deku says they help people, so that's good. Hi, she says. It's nice to meet you. It's nice to meet you too. His voice is soft. Eri likes that he doesn't yell. Nice rabbit. Thank you. She's not sure what's going on. He doesn't look like he knows what's going on either. Did you come to visit me? He nods, and Deku says yes. Eri frowns, wondering why, and Deku smiles and taps her lightly on the nose. Because he was being nosy and wanted to know where I go every day. I brought him along so he knows I'm not getting in trouble. Oh. She looks at his friend, Shouder. He's named Shouder. Does he get in trouble a lot? Shouder blinks, then leans closer like he's sharing a secret with her. All the time. He doesn't get in trouble here, she says. Deku's nice. He reads me books. And he tells me things when I don't understand. And sometimes he goes with me when I need shots. She points to the purple band-aid on her arm. Shouder inspects it and nods. From there, the visit goes like it always does, except Shouder is there too. They talk to her. Deku talks the most, like always, but he doesn't seem to mind. Nurse Mitsu comes in to listen to her chest for her heartbeat, Deku says. They look through more books, and Deku shows her a funny video of his cat. It's only when they are about to leave that Eri asks a question that she's had. Deku doesn't mind questions. He likes when she asks him questions, but she isn't sure if Shouder likes them. You have a mark on your face, she says. Shouder looks back, and he doesn't look angry, so she asks her question. I have marks too. She shows her arms again, with all the little lines and dots and patches that the nurses don't have. So does Deku. Are they the same kind of marks? For some reason, Deku's smiling a little at that, but is behind Shouder where Shouder can't see him. Yes, Shouder tells her. Okay. Shouder's nice. If he comes again, she'd be okay with that. Thank you for visiting me. He smiles at her. She doesn't smile back, she's not sure how. It was good to meet you. Hey, Midoriya. It's late and their homework is finished, and the likelihood that Chowder will go back to his own room to sleep is getting smaller by the minute. That girl at the hospital. I know you're probably not allowed to tell me details, but who was she? Why'd you take me to her? She's someone I met on a patrol, Midoriya answers. She spooks easily, especially around medical stuff, so they keep calling me back to help keep her calm. He shrugs. I just figured if you're starved for good personal reasons to be a hero, there's one more. Personal. Chowder echoes, shifting over so Midoriya can sit on his bed next to him. I just met her. Why would she be personal for me? Because right now, walking around somewhere probably surrounded by civilized people, there's a very bad man who wants to use her for her quirk, Midoriya says. Chowder goes still. I don't know why and I don't know how, Midoriya goes on, shrugging. But that's the situation. So, I don't know, maybe if you need a reason that's not just you or your mom or the people you want to be proud of you, there's people like her that you haven't met yet. He grins at Chowder, but it's Blake. Lots of scared kids out there. And that's something. It's not as deep-rooted as the desire to free his mother. It's not a persistent itch like the desire to catch up to his friends. But it's something. Maybe it's something he can offer Gang Orca the next time they talk. Do you have to go out again today? Tamaki asks him at the end of the day as they leave the locker room with their shoes on and their book bags packed. Yep. Mirio answers. I'll be back around 5:30 like usual, but for now I have to swing by Grounds Theater to meet up with Midoriya. You can come if you want, you can say hi to Kirishima. Tamaki makes a quiet strangled noise. But if they are in Grounds Theater, then they probably just finished up with rescue drills, and that means he'll have energy. Energy, Mirio. It's bad enough going on patrol with him. Oh, is your Kohai a handful? Mirio asks. He's not bad, Tamaki admits. He's really good, actually. He's just a lot. A lot, all the time. I lose half my spoons just looking directly at him. Wonder if there's a way to switch Kohais for an afternoon, Mirio muses. Kirishima sounds like a lot of fun, he sounds like a riot. Boy, is it a shame he's not in Night Eye's agency, because Mirio would tell that one daily if he was, and Midoriya's whole demeanor would probably mesh better with Tamaki's comfort zone. It's just hard to handle first years, Tamaki says. They're the exact opposite of me. So bright and optimistic and not burnt out. But I'm bright and optimistic and not burnt out, and you love me, Mirio points out. And I've been ingesting your presence since the 3rd grade, Tamaki says gravely. I've built up an immunity. Your brightness is benign. Maybe it's like a vaccine, Mirio says. My faux first-year energy can inoculate you to real first-year energy. I'll let you know if it works. Grounds Theater is a perpetually bombed-out mini-cityscape on the west side of campus and rather infamous to hero students familiar with training there. Support students are authorized to use it for testing grounds just to keep it freshly ravaged. It's rare that students leave Ground Theater without getting dusty, so there are showers located just outside of it. As Mirio and Tamaki approach, Mirio spots Aizawa supervising Class 1A as they file out in clumps and cliques, all of them damp and battered and wearing fresh clothes. Mirio spots Midoriya's dark curls among them and waves to get his attention. It doesn't work, Aizawa's addressing the class, so all eyes are on him. Mirio stops a short distance away and lets Tamaki shuffle behind him to stay out of everyone's direct line of sight. Keep your performance today fresh in your minds, Aizawa tells them. I'll be addressing each of you individually on how you can improve from here, so don't let me catch any of you writing this off as just another exercise. His class responds with a ragged yes, Sensei. And one more thing, we enforce lights out for a reason. Try to keep nightly wanderings to a minimum, even if you stay within the building. If you have trouble sleeping, I suggest you see Recovery Girl about it instead of waking up one of your classmates about it, understood? Yes, Sensei. Understood, Kaminari. The student in question offers half-hearted protests but eventually responds in the affirmative. Good. You're all dismissed. Aizawa turns on his heel to head back to the main campus. At this point the third years fall into his line of vision and he offers them both a nod. Behind him, Kaminari is still pouting at his classmate, the pink-horned girl whose name escapes Mirio at the moment. I don't see why under one getting called out, he says in a tone that's trying to be hushed and failing. Midoriya spends what, 4-5 nights a week in Todoroki's room. Without missing a beat or changing his expression, Aizawa stops walking and turns around again. A few of the others groan, and Midoriya winces in sympathy when he sees the look on Midoriya and Todoroki's faces. The pink girl swats Kaminari in the shoulder. Way to go, Kaminari. Kirishima is looking at his classmate with pure dismay. Come on man, we said we wouldn't snitch. Aizawa sighs loudly. I stand corrected. Everyone but Midoriya and Todoroki, you're dismissed. The class leaves the area, most of them still ragging mercilessly on Kaminari. Kirishima spots the third years and calls out an enthusiastic greeting, which Tamaki answers with a high-pitched noise of his own. Aizawa and the remaining 2 students move further away to keep from being overheard. None of them look happy about it. Midoriya purses his lips, eyes wide. He really shouldn't laugh, but he also really wants to. It was kind of inevitable, he says, his voice tight with held-back mirth. I mean with the dawns and everything. Tamaki gives a world-weary sigh. Teenagers, he says. Tamaki, we're literally both teenagers. Millimeter, Tamaki leans over to bump his shoulder lightly. I'm gonna go. See you this evening. Make sure Nejaya doesn't eat my yogurt again, okay? Luckily, for the 2 first years especially, the conversation doesn't take long. Todoroki hurries after his classmates at a power walk. Midoriya, by this point, has spotted Midoriya and is approaching him with a disgruntled look on his face. That looked rough, Midoriya remarks, waving one last time to Aizawa. Let's just go. Of course, there's enough time between the school and the hospital for the conversation to start up again. They've barely left campus when Midoriya says, hope you didn't get in too much trouble. I know Aizawa's pretty tough. And technically there's no rule against not sleeping in your own dorm, though different teachers have different standards and there are extenuating. We are not in trouble, Midoriya says with a shrug. He basically just gave us the be safe and smart and see recovery girl talk. There's nothing to punish anyway. Oh, that's good. Midoriya says brightly. You don't look very happy for someone who isn't being punished. I'm just not looking forward to this evening, Midoriya admits. They won't mean about it, but they tease, and if we leave together to escape the teasing it'll only get worse, so. Midoriya winces in sympathy again. OOF, that's no fun. I kind of know how that feels, kind of. I mean, I'm not actually in that kind of relationship, but. There is no relationship. Midoriya snaps. I don't get why anyone thinks there is, or has to be. There isn't. He stops immediately, as if just remembering where he is and who he's talking to. Sorry. That wasn't aimed at you. It's just weird, confusing teenager stuff. Maybe. Midoriya pulls a face. I don't even know sometimes. Midoriya squints at him for a moment. This is starting to feel a bit familiar. Maybe it could be, but he can't be sure. It's a strong maybe. He needs more information. I could try taking a shot at it if you want, he offers. I know there's only 2 years between us, but you never know. I know things. And I'm impartial. You're really not, Midoriya says. You care about everything. Exactly. I care about everything equally, therefore I'm impartial. I'm not sure that's how it works. Midoriya grins. Try me. Midoriya hesitates, eyeing him cautiously for a moment. Todoroki and I are together, that way, he says at length. We are not interested in it, either. We've talked about that, and we both agree. Things are starting to click. You aren't together that way, Midoriya echoes. Implying you are together some way. Right? Midoriya nods. It doesn't feel like we are just friends, he continues. I mean, we sleep together, literally. We just sleep. And I can't imagine doing that with any of my other friends or telling them some of the stuff I tell him. It's just, we are close, but we don't want to date each other. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes so much sense, Midoriya thinks. It makes all the sense. You care about him a lot, then. I mean, obviously. You love him, Midoriya goes on, and Midoriya draws his shoulders in like a turtle. Well, You love him, Midoriya repeats. But you're not in love with him. Does that sound about right? The shoulders go down. Midoriya blinks, and oh, does Midoriya recognize that look in his eyes. He must have had one just like it, back when it all clicked for him. Why yeah, Midoriya says quietly. That's exactly right. He turns to Midoriya with a clear question in his eyes. I've known Tamaki since we were 8, Midoriya tells him, grinning fondly. I trust him with my life, along with a lot of other things. But, not that way. Oh, Midoriya says. He is the face and voice of someone whose world is rearranging itself a little. I didn't know that, I thought it was weird, because... There's a word for it, Midoriya says. Well, in English at least. It's a bit of a mouthful, queer platonic. Personally, I find QP easier to say. QP, Midoriya repeats in a hushed voice. There's a word for it. Sure is. Basically, it's like having a significant other that's not romantic. It's all about the level of commitment and intimacy, I guess. It varies based on the person, but it's not weird, and there's nothing wrong with it. Do you know anybody else like that? Midoriya asks. There are online forums and stuff for it, Midoriya replies. But in person, well... He hesitates. He wants to be truthful, and it could very well mean the world to Midoriya. But it also might not be Midoriya's business, and... Senpai. It's possible, Midoriya says. I don't really know for sure. But there was someone who helped me figure this out when I was sort of in the same spot you were. He didn't know any fancy words for it, but it helped to talk to him because it really felt like he understood on a personal level. He helped a lot just by sharing his own experiences, and it felt really familiar when he talked about it. His voice trails off. Midoriya has this weirdly piercing way of looking at people, like he hears way more than what they choose to tell him. Midoriya swipes his hand over his face. Please don't tell him I told you this, I'd never hear the end of it. You're talking about Night Eye, Midoriya says softly. Aren't you? Midoriya knows he's a terrible liar, so he nods. Like I said, I don't know for sure, and I didn't learn the language for it until later when I did my own research. But I don't know, Midoriya. I just got that feeling whenever Sir talked about All Might. Midoriya doesn't say anything to that, doesn't say anything at all until they get to the hospital. Midoriya only hopes he hasn't overstepped. But he couldn't have helped himself, seeing Midoriya so frustrated and confused. He may be an enigma sometimes, but Midoriya's known for a while that more than anything else, Midoriya wants to be understood. So it's worth it, just to put that familiar look in his eyes, like disparate pieces are falling into place and the world is finally making a little more sense.